Good morning, everyone. It is, figure out the echo, there we go. Good morning, everyone. It is 9:02. It is May 2nd, 2023. Welcome to our 9 a.m. strategic planning meeting. Let the record reflect that we have four commissioners are here. Commissioner Waldrop, I believe, is probably on her way, so we will see her shortly. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get going because we've got a busy agenda. So, Mike Burgess. There you are. We see you.
Morning, commissioners.
Welcome. So I will let you go ahead and take the lead on this.
Okay. Sent you 3 attachments. Yes, perfect. Let's start with that one. Just kind of wrapping things up. As you all know, we finished a week ago Sunday. On balance, I thought it was a pretty normal session. Nothing really jumped out until the last day with that whole thing with Blake, which I'm sure that we'll want to talk about here in a little bit. One of the last things that the legislature did do was adopt their budget. Wanted to point out a handful of budget provisos of interest to you all. This is by no means the entire list of budget provisos for Spokane, the region, but these are kind of more Spokane County specific, maybe but for the one there at the bottom with the medical school. I just threw that one in because it's a decent chunk of change and wanted you to see it there. But we had talked about this waste to energy proviso, this study language. It did make it in the budget. Along with this behavioral health proviso, the 1.125 million, that's nothing new. That is a proviso that we've had probably going on the last at least 6 budgets, if not more. And then this $2 million proviso here to study PCBs in the river. That's a pretty decent amount of money for a study. So there'll be work to do there for your water quality folks this interim. And then, as I mentioned, there is the medical school. Just broadly on the operating budget, commissioners wanted to point out to you, it grows by about, I think it's 9% compared to this is the whole budget, 9% compared to the previous biennium, did so without a tax increase. You probably read, and we might have talked, there were a couple proposals on the table kind of towards the end, I would say until a couple 3 days till session ended. One on the REIT, an increase in the REIT that contained a local option on the REIT. That bill did not pass, and nor did the governor's housing bond that he floated back in December, before session started as part of his plan to deal with housing. Housing was kind of what I would say the dominant issue of the session in general. There were probably 6-7 housing policy bills that passed, along with over $1 billion in investment in housing between the capital and operating budgets. A couple of those housing bills are impactful for you. Most of them are city-centric, but there is one that deals with ADU requirements that Scott's aware of. We've been talking about that bill. But as I understand it, you all are relatively advanced on some of your housing policies anyway, so I'm not sure how impactful that one's going to be. Incidentally, too, on the governor, he just announced he's not running. That rumor was confirmed this morning. I think sent out a press release. On the capital budget side, wanted to call out a couple items that were on our agenda. The stadium, both for the stadium. The larger chunk was the money that was part of that whole coalition group that we were a part of. And this other 543, you might remember, that is money that was left over, that was appropriated last biennium, that was going to go towards the stadium. We as a county had that request in with the city of Spokane Valley. The money was not spent, so that money was reallocated towards the project. I also, in that email, sent you, and I guess if Jeff is there, if he hears me, maybe you could forward that out to the commissioners. it's a long list of all of the capital budget projects that were funded in Spokane County. We don't need to go over those one by one, but if you guys have it there, it's great. Just at your leisure, take a peek through it. You'll see it's got like the community colleges on it, the parks projects, all of those types of things. So just that's more of an FYI. But the items that were specifically on your agenda, I called out here on this list, being the two stadium, the stadium ask. One other item within the capital budget, we had talked on the policy level about the green building requirements. That legislation did not pass. I think we had talked about that, but there is a proviso in the capital budget to do some study work and recommendations to the legislature. One of the folks on that work group is someone from a county person. So I'll reach out to the Association of Counties to see what they're going to do on that in terms of, normally on those study groups, what they'll do is they'll ask a person, an employee of a county, a staff member that's an expert in that area to participate in those. I don't know that, you have staff clearly that has a large interest in this area, has done a lot of work, a lot of research. And clearly that's a decision for you all as a board of commissioners, if you want to offer your staff up to participate in this work group. But I assume that'll be coordinated through WASAC. So maybe more to come on that, or you might be hearing from WASAC, but like I said, your staff was very well versed in that. And then on the last budget item there, I just put NSC, North South Corridor. I think you know by now that those funds were appropriated, not in the manner that the governor's budget did them. So should feel good about where things are there. So that's kind of a high level run through of the three budgets, keeping in mind, commissioners, that the budgets are not final yet. The governor has until, I think I did the math right, he has until May 12th or 13th to sign all his bills. It might even trickle into the week of the 14th. But anyway, the budgets are almost always the last things that are signed into law. They will contain a number of vetoes of provisos and different things. And the provisos on this list are things that could be dealt with by the governor. I wouldn't anticipate that, given that most provisos are asked for by legislators. And we have clearly key legislators involved in the budgeting process. So we'll just have to see how those all play out. You can expect from me in a couple weeks after the budget is final to let you know that it is final, and if there was anything vetoed in it that we would be of interest to the county. So do you have any questions, commissioners, about the budgets? Like it's a very high level run through there for you.
Commissioner French?
Yeah, Mike, I don't have one specific about the budget. I saw the $2.5 million for Fairchild was in there, but
Yeah.
There was a bill, and I think Lieutenant Governor Heck was the one that introduced the language, but I could be wrong, that required the Building Code Council to go back and look at the increased demands that they were putting on new housing construction and come back to the legislature with recommendations for modifications to those requirements and stuff. And so I did see it in one of the bills, but I don't have all my information available to me, so I don't know which the bill number was. It might have been the climate change bill, but could be the condo bill too. Anyway, if you can find out whether that passed or not, that would be helpful. And
So Commissioner, sorry to interrupt you. So it's a study that was in one of the bills?
no, it was a directive to one of I think it was from the House to the Building Code Council that they go back and identify those items in the code update that created a financial burden on affordability of housing.
I will, I'm making a note. I'll see what I can find.
Right.
I know who to ask. So I'll take a peek, see what I can get for you.
Thank you.
Any other items, commissioners? And be clear too, I'm still digesting the budget, still going through it. So if I find any other things of note, I will definitely message you with those. And And if you want to transition then to the other attachment I sent, which is a list of bills that is familiar to you all, nothing new here. You'll just notice on the status of them that they're moving through the process. If it says delivered to the governor has not acted on that bill yet. And if it has a CO, that's a chapter law. So it has actually been signed into law already, if it has that number. So like I said, nothing new here other than I will highlight to you that the condo liability bill, that's 5258, kind of towards a little bit more towards the bottom, second from the bottom on the first page. It did make it through. That was one of the last bills to go for any number of reasons. And then,
Mike,
yes.
you said that was dead. Remember?
No.
I'm just giving you a
Well,
hard time. You resurrected it somehow. Good job.
Well, if I had, Commissioner, if I had that kind of power, I don't think I'd be doing this. But it did, because it hadn't passed cutoffs at one point, but it did have a fiscal impact. So that's what made it necessary to go through.
Do you know if they made any adjustments at the end?
No, because it didn't have to. I'd have to go back and look at the history, Commissioner. So I'll take a look.
They didn't.
But I read it at one point. I didn't see anything substantive on the amendments.
Okay.
The long and the short of what they did is they basically took condo projects, 12 units and under, out of the liability proviso. And other than that, they really didn't do a whole hell of a lot, in terms of
So
promoting
the
condos.
larger condo units are
There's a much
still.
larger opportunity and stuff. And I think,
Okay.
if you remember, that's one of the things that Lieutenant Governor Heck was talking about is, I hope my party doesn't lose courage. Well, they lost it because they didn't go far enough. And so I don't know. I've already talked to a couple builders and they're kind of going, yeah, this is not going to move the dial that much. So it might be a couple projects, but not a lot to.
Not any large projects or
Not
like
any large projects or
rehabbing
anything.
downtown. It wouldn't work. 'Cause you'd have more than 12 units.
Yeah.
In any of those downtown old, apartment buildings or something. Yeah.
No, missed opportunity.
Okay, keep working on it, Mike.
Well, but Commissioner, that might be, there was the Patton bill that was smaller. Is that the one you're referring to?
Oh, maybe this is the.
Yeah, I thought the Patton bill was the 12 unit.
It was.
Yeah.
Oh, so this
I don't
was,
think that's
this one
the-
is a larger one?
I don't know what this one does. I'm not
We'll have
sure.
to look at it.
But
Yeah,
it
so Commissioners, I'll do some more research on it and send you a message about it. How about that?
Because this was the House bill that actually ended up,
Oh, it's a Senate bill.
oh no, it's Senate, you're right.
Well, but it looks like, so it passed out of the Senate unanimously, and then it went to the House. In the House, it looks like they did a striker in committee, and then it also passed unanimously out of the House, but then the Senate concurred unanimously out of the Senate. So, I don't know. Nobody voted against it at any point,
No.
it looks like, so.
It looks like in reading the substantive changes in the House committee, I don't want to bog you down, so let me look into it further and then message you back about it. But the second to last bill, there is the Blake bill. You've all heard, I'm sure, enough about that now. If you're going to ask me if I know if a special session's coming, I don't. At this point, I haven't heard. I know there were discussions on this issue last week. I wish I had a better answer for you other than to say, I just don't know yet if there's the will in the legislature to deal with it. Just on the political side, it's, one of the more fascinating things that you'll see happen. It's very rare that a bill comes up and goes down on the floor. That it's very rare that bills are voted down. And this one was, so it was kind of some high drama there on the last day on a serious subject matter, for sure. But if I do certainly hear of next steps, I will let you know as soon as I hear something. I'm sure there'll be numerous press reports. This is kind of the biggest thing still left hanging out there for what the legislature could deal with. So if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer those. I think that Jeff had asked me last week for a side-by-side of the Senate bill, then the House bill, and then the conference committee report. if he hasn't given that to you, I can get that to you. It's, so just kind of lays out what the differences were in the policy. But pretty interesting issue politically, like I said, with some pretty serious outcomes. So we'll have to wait and see what the legislature decides to do on their end. I do know the governor's been talking to leadership on both sides about that.
Well, and Mike, I think I heard that the committee's already been, the people have been assigned to the committee that would work out the draft.
I've heard similar, Commissioner. And so, I mean, I guess the question is what's going to change,
Yeah.
you know, in terms of what the bill does. I mean, it's a really unique issue that you have folks voting no for, you know, drastically different reasons. You know, one group voting no because it doesn't go far enough, another voting before it goes too far. So you've got and then this middle ground. And right now they don't have 50 votes for it in the House. So.
But I think it sounds like several commissioners have been talking to other commissioners and all of that across the state. I know WASAC, or the virtual assembly today at noon is going to be on this topic. I think they'll have WAPA there, the Prosecuting Attorneys Association, to help, you know,
Right.
answer
There's, and you all would know better than I, but there's a lot of questions about if you did adopt your own ordinance, how does that interact with the cities around you if they do theirs? And I mean, there's a lot of questions surrounding it. And obviously the virtual assembly will address some of that information.
Yes, I know here in Spokane County, the sheriff, Chris Anderson, our chief deputy, is having a meeting Wednesday with other city, you know, that are within the jurisdiction of the sheriff's department. Because anyone that the sheriff contracts with, it'd be hard to have it be not consistent within those structures. So they're having that meeting on Wednesday to talk about it, because the cities would have to follow the same ordinance that the county would require, or that we would do if we choose to do an ordinance. So that way, then the cities that the sheriff's office is part of the jurisdictions with, you know, contracts with, has the same ordinance. So that's a discussion happening on Wednesday. I think for the commissioners, would we like to put a letter forward to the legislature, you know, asking them, you know, that we'd like them to take this fix and do that. So that's an option we have as commissioners. I mean, obviously, we're going to be going down the path of an ordinance. I think, I know several commissioners have mentioned that. I know the sheriff and the prosecuting attorney have their thoughts on what they would like that ordinance to look like. You've talked to people across the state. I talked to Reagan Dunn over in King County as well. I know, Chris, you've talked to legislators as well, too. So I think we're something, you know, and talking with, you know, Eric Johnson, that we've got to do some kind of, you know, the counties are going to have to do something in case it doesn't, there is no special session. I think there may be a possibility after today's virtual assembly to have the legislative steering committee come back together, because it would have to go through the legislative steering committee for it to be an official WASAC opinion or thought, you know, as we, you know, because there's been requests to have WASAC put together, you know, potential ordinances for different counties. So so those are what I know of conversations that are happening. You know, it just happened, and so we've got to, you know, start to figure it out. This is the first time we've come together. So, Commissioner French.
Yeah, so when I heard that the legislature had not done it, I reached out to Representative Lowe from Snohomish County, who's also a county commissioner. He serves in both roles, and know him very well from some other work, and asked what was going on. And he said that Nate Naring, county commissioner from Snohomish, had already worked with legal to draft up an ordinance that they were going to be adopting locally, and that they were going to try and socialize it with other counties throughout the state. And as I understand, and I got a copy of it, I forwarded it to Chris, I talked to Larry Haskell, I talked to John Knowles, All three of them have been talking to each other. The one thing that John pointed out and Larry supported was that part of the challenge is going to be being able to process test kits within the statute of limitations timeframe. And I talked to John and I said, okay, what does that look like for us to do that locally? And he said he'd get some numbers for us. It's a couple pieces of equipment and maybe another staff person. So I asked him to get some numbers for us so that we could have a conversation about that, because that would then give us the opportunity to not only test for drugs, but some other cases where we're backlogged at the state. And so maybe we just say, okay, fine, we'll just do our own testing here locally and stuff. So he's going to bring some numbers on that. But so I've had the language delivered to Chris and to John and to Larry, and so they're perusing through it. And like I say, I know that Sam's, Representative Lowe's position was that there was a compromise bill that would have gotten the votes, but the chair of the House refused to bring it forward, so it was not voted on. And so that's the language they're going to incorporate because they felt they had the greatest amount of support across the aisle on it to pass it, but the chair just didn't like it. So that's what I hear. I don't know that that's factual. I'm just sharing everything I know. So, but there will be a campaign to try and get a lot of the counties to pass it, with the hope that if enough counties pass it, maybe that will encourage the legislature to be able to do what we think we can enforce. So that's what I know from the first part of last week.
And I know on the testing, through ARP dollars, we had bought test equipment for the medical examiner's facility. Right. And so we're checking with the medical examiner too to see what, how much is that getting used? I think Mike, you're on that. Yeah.
So she was gone last week, but maybe she got this week.
To see, since we already have the machines,
okay.
Is it just the test kits? Do we have to have additional person for Larry to, for prosecution purposes? What does that mean and what do we need to do? So
that'd be great if we already had it.
So we're looking into that right now. So does anyone else have anything else to add?
I've spoken with some legislators. What I'm hearing is I think a special session is really likely. And then I saw there was a statement by the governor, I think on Friday, saying he's hoping to call one very soon. So I just would be curious to know what people think about some kind of letter to the governor calling on them to hold a special session and take action. I think we could potentially come up with something that we could all agree to, and then it would be kind of get your act together legislature statement. And I think my biggest thought is we can't have a patchwork, right? It'd be confusing for the sheriff's office, confusing for the public. So they really need to get back to work until this is done, is my view on it.
Yeah, but we have to be ready in case they don't. So I think that's
Right.
what, from the county's perspective, like, talking to Eric Johnson, and like I said, and other commissioners, that we, it's like we've got to be poised and ready to move forward. But I would be in favor of starting, at least drafting a letter to get sent this week to the governor's office. So, Commissioner French.
So I'd be in supportive of the letter if it included language that said, if you don't, we will. Because without that, there's no incentive for them to do anything other than say, well, we got a nice letter. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. There doesn't seem at the legislative level to be a sense of urgency about this. And I haven't seen, of course, it's only been a week, so maybe I'm being too critical, but I haven't seen that level of urgency from the governor's office. I mean, cities across the state, as well as counties, are already drafting language. And you're right, it's going to be a patchwork. It's going to be a nightmare for enforcing and everything else. I mean, you won't know whether you're legal or not when you cross from one county to the next.
Right, or one city to the next.
Yeah, one city to the next.
So I think, I would like a letter, but I think we definitely, part of that letter is saying we are already working
Yeah.
towards, an ordinance, because we have to be prepared.
Commissioners, if you're going to do a letter, I would just urge you, great, do it to the governor, but just do it to the governor and the Washington State Legislature. Just have a blanket.
Okay. Well, so can we work with you on that too then, to make sure we get it to the right people?
Yeah, if you get it to me, I'll get it to, the entire Spokane delegation and then the other legislators that are involved in the negotiations, and then folks in the governor's office, staff members, probably share it with WASAC too. I mean, I'll get it everywhere it needs to go. But obviously the sooner the better.
And I think the thought would be too, to have the sheriff and Larry Haskell, the prosecuting attorney, both sign on to it as well.
Yeah, that would be
So it's,
good.
so it's a group effort, not
That'd be
just,
great.
just that it's everyone that's involved in it, so. And if we get that done by if we look at signing a letter other than an open public meeting, what's the timeframe, Mike, that you think we need this?
Well, it's very possible Commissioner Jordan has talked to legislators. I haven't. So I mean, if you're hearing Commissioner soon, I don't know what soon would mean in terms of a special session.
Yeah, my sense was maybe a week or two, but I think we
Yeah.
should get it as soon as possible, the letter piece going.
Okay.
It won't be effective. I think getting it out this week would probably be. There's a lot of energy around this.
Yeah, no, there is.
Yeah.
Mr. French, you were saying there was like some sort of effort to try and come up with another kind of compromise then to get it passed off the floor.
So according to Representative Lowe, he said that there was a bill that had support from both the Ds and the Rs, but that the chair refused to bring it forward for a vote. And so that was some of the politics that played into why even some of the Ds didn't support the measures, because there was a better bill and they were trying to force the House chair to bring it forward and vote on it, but they refused to. So I don't know.
It was the Senate bill, the Senate
Yeah.
bill that both Republican and Democrat support,
But that's not the one that.
but the.
That's not the one they voted on.
But they, yeah.
Yeah, Commissioner, I'm guessing that the bill that Representative Lowe is referencing is the Senate version. I don't know that for a fact.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing that's what it was. And that was kind of the line out of the minority party in particular, a week ago, Monday, Tuesday, about where things stood with them.
Well, and what was shared with me, not necessarily by Representative Lowe, but a couple other representatives, was a high level of frustration with the chair that they refused to bring it forward and feel like some of this is self-inflicted pain. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. And so I don't know what they'll do about that, if anything, but there was a degree of frustration with, give us the Senate bill, let's vote on it.
So Jeff, I see you over there. Would we be able to work up a letter this afternoon that we could maybe get out to everybody for edits tonight? Makes everybody work a little bit, but that way then we could just approve it tomorrow at the 2:00. Just try to get it done. Okay, that's good. Thank you, because Chris actually drafted, some bullet points, so I think that
Get those to Jeff.
we'll get that figured out and get it in. So okay, so we'll work on something quickly and talk about it tomorrow at 2:00. Is there anything else? Okay. Mike, thank you. It's been, great to have the session end on time, although we will have the special session for Blake, but, that's gotta feel good.
Yes, believe me, yes, been nice to be home, for sure.
Yes. Well, thank you for all your efforts, and then we'll be in touch on the letter, and hopefully we'll know tomorrow.
And then I'll follow up with you on the condo liability issue, and then anything else I hear about Blake, I will let you know.
Okay.
But we'll go from there. Thank you all. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Okay, and that's gonna take us to Kyle.
Good morning, Commissioners. We have a small handful of items to brief you on this morning. Starting with the Bigelow Gulch Phase 2 bid results. For those of you, it says it's Phase 2, it's actually because of the way we cut it up. This is the final phase of this corridor project that is decades in the making. And this is maybe the most challenging project phase in the corridor. So I'll have Matt brief you. We have a little bit of a blow in our estimate. I shouldn't say a little bit of a blow within our estimate and our bid results. However, we still are recommending awarding the project, but we'll get into a few details of where that came from and why we think we should still press forward.
Morning, Commissioners. Appreciate the time to go through these two items. The first one, Bigelow, and then a bridge that we're going to weight restrict. So on Bigelow, next slide, please. These were our bids as they came back, and it was an exciting bid opening. They opened from bottom to top. That's too little to read for the most part, but our first bid was 17.5 million on our estimate of 9.8. So that got our attention, and then it went to 17, 15, and then our Scarcella came in at 12.8. So that was 3 million over what we had estimated, and that's about 30%, so that's a lot. Next slide. So obviously we pulled apart the estimate. The biggest thing by far was the earthwork and the rock excavation. I think you all are familiar with the type of projects we do. We're very good at doing our projects that we have a lot of experience with, asphalt projects, urban projects. We don't do a lot of big earthwork projects nor a lot of rock excavation, and our unit prices were not good. So low bid was 4.5 essentially. We had estimated 2.15. So that is the bulk of the blow on this estimate, along with when you do that mobilizations, generally 10% of your estimate. So it goes up another $500,000 to go along with that. Along with that, there were a bunch of other price escalation you can see here, but they were fairly trivial in scope compared to the rock and the excavation. Next slide. So without that, it was essentially on our engineer's estimate, but due to that one item, that's really why we're here today. We do recommend awarding it. We thought about going back out to bid, but to be frank, we might get worse bids. And we have a lot of strings attached to the money. There's a number of funding agencies on this project, and they don't have timelines that would allow us to push here or anything like that. So we do recommend awarding it. We think the bid we have is good from Scarcella. And part of that was not just our inexperience with the larger earthwork projects, but it was a lot of cost escalation in general. And we've been seeing that.
Did you, I'm sure you did, but I'd just be curious, did you guys consider maybe pulling some of that work out and doing it on a cost plus basis with a not to exceed? Since you've got an awful lot of unknowns.
Yeah, I mean, we have looked at this a lot of different ways, is what I would tell you. And there are some opportunities that may come up during the project itself, cost reduction proposals. There's a ton of rock. Conceivably, a contractor could crush on site and use that rock in the project and switch to a conventional section instead of a cement treated base. There may be opportunities, but that's going to be at the contractor's discretion. Okay. And, you know, we'll go back to all of our funding partners and find a lot of them have been addressing additional cost escalation, but that's an uncertainty. You know, we know where we're at today, and we can cover that cost. That's going to be painful. We've got to find $3 million in the budget, but at this point, we do recommend awarding it.
So I do know that CRAB is sitting on some additional surplus funds. So you might want to consider putting in a request for an adjustment from CRAB on that too, because I think we've got quite a bit of money that we're trying to get out. So this might be well timed.
We will be visiting all of our funding partners.
I just had a question about, was the excavation, the rock work, was that elevated in all of the bids? above what you were expecting. So that was consistent in all the bids, okay.
And Scarcella's, that's their bread and butter is large earthwork projects, so it's not surprising they came back the least expensive. But yeah, no, we were very fortunate that it came in the way it did, because otherwise we'd be looking for 6 or 7 million.
So what is the path forward then? Do you have an overall budget for the whole project? Or is this the remaining part of
This
the,
is the last.
this is the last piece?
phase. Yeah, so this is our closing project, just ending on a high note financially.
So do you have other funds that we're gonna go to other projects that you'd have to pull from to make up the delta? Or what?
Yeah, we have a number of 100% county funded projects that can slide a year. And we'll look at our budget. It's a big fund and we have monies in there for other projects. It's just, we're gonna have to weigh those and see what we want to do going forward.
So the two things we'll look to is, so this has a lot of multiple funding sources in it. We have a few projects that are 100% county, so push those out a year and also see if we can find some matching funds on some of those. There's a couple of good opportunities, good candidates, and then in essence, we just add a year to 1 or 2 of those. We'll be okay.
We didn't have any federal highway money in this project, did we?
No, we did not.
So Commissioner French, I'll just ask you, so on CRAB, how quickly do they need to get requested to CRAB?
I'm surprised they haven't already called. No, you want to get into that cycle right away. We just had our April meeting, so July would be the next meeting and stuff. And so, I give Drew a call and, say, hey, we've got this, we got a bus, we need some help. And see if he can, there's a couple different pots of money that we might be able to pull some money out of. So,
We've reached out to him already and I'm actually gonna be over there for training all week, so.
oh, okay.
I'll be talking to him.
You'll have us,
Was he
you'll have his
was he
ear.
optimistic that there might be some avenues?
We'll see. Everybody was a little non-committal, but they were gonna
Yeah.
start looking.
Okay. Well, if need be, I could put a call to Jane too.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. This next one is a bridge on the West Plains, not far from our Euclid Road Bridge project. And you can see there, it's right on Deep Creek. Slide, please. Actually, that's it. The posting you can see, you can't read it, but this bridge is okay except for one specific unit type. It's the new unit the federal government's been having us analyze. And the requirement's 39 tons and this one posts at 37. So I mean, it's very close to being okay. There is a federal call out and part of the rationale for posting this is to additional rationale for the grant application. So we are gonna put in for a grant for this one. And it's on timber pile, so it's just a matter of time before we need to visit it anyway. So I thought we'd get in on this ask. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Okay, so we have Rob and Amy here to talk about and ask for water rate out of our Wire 55 water bank.
Great, thank you very much, Kyle, and good morning, Commissioners. Amy Silmer and Rob Lindsay with Environmental Services this morning. And I'll just provide a couple of words up front to set the stage. Amy's got some more technical information to share, but to sum it up, we've been approached by a developer to for a portion of our water bank. Just as a reminder, this is the portion of our water right portfolio that we own. This is the water bank that we purchased that has a defined area of use. We found that following the Hearst legislation that basically reopened the door to a lot of public to individual domestic wells, that this water bank is providing value to developers that are developing larger groups of homes in rural settings, and then we coordinate with ecology, and then the proposed use from this water bank then is modeled and is evaluated against existing uses in for impairment and so forth. So this is it's a defined process with ecology. So anyway, I'll let Amy describe a little bit more about the location and the size of the houses.
Thanks, Rob. So this is just a quick overview of where our water bank has distributed our water for right now. And you can see most of it is towards the north end of our mitigation area towards Deer Park. But this particular request is towards the southern portion that is below to the south of the SBRT aquifer. Next slide, please. So we're in the early stages of this request. The developer plans on creating 58 1-acre parcels, and they'll require about 22.5 acre feet from our water bank. That's for both indoor use, and they're proposing 400 square feet of irrigation per parcel. Our revenue from this will be about $138,000. And that includes all of our fees for the certificates. It will require another general water right permit with ecology. We just presented one last month with the Gilliam and Lane property. So we'll go through that same process with ecology, and that usually takes about a year. So again, we're very early so that we can get any of your concerns. The other thing I want to mention is that this is near a City of Spokane water service area. Their water service area is actually just to the south of this development, but they have expanded a water line for the Blue Heron development that is off of Regina Lane, and that's kind of labeled in that figure. This was due to an agreement that the city had with that development from the 1990s, but when the developers of the Indian Trail properties approached the city, they refused to connect them to water service, which is why they came to us to get water through the water bank. So at this point, we just want authorization to proceed with this process. I'll engage ecology on what they need for their water right permits, and we'll go through that process before we even issue the mitigation certificates. And a future action item will be to authorize Kyle to be able to submit the permits on behalf of the county.
I would add that we have had a meeting with Scott Chesney in the planning department, so he is familiar with this ask, and he did. We can certainly follow up with him, but during our meeting, there wasn't anything about this particular project that he found offensive.
So what size lots are they gonna be putting in here? 10 acres, 7 acre?
1 acre.
1 acre
58
lots.
1 acre lots, and they'll take all of about, I put down the, so parcel 26096.9030, so that smaller one in the bottom corner, it'll take up most of that parcel, go along the south end of parcel 26094.9006, and then just a tiny sliver of that far western parcel. So they'll be in that general area.
Why, do we know why the city declined to extend the service area or whatever the action would be there?
Well, I'm not comfortable, characterizing their approach toward water, other than to say that they've drawn a fairly hard line at the urban growth area boundaries. And that's,
So where is the UGA then? On,
It's just the south of the development, so, you can
Oh.
kind of see where there's a lot of homes down there, it's just in between those two.
So they're using the cluster development approach on this? That's what they're doing. Okay, that's why I was
it is a
challenged with how they were getting.
Oh.
oh, cause you.
yeah, the 1 in
Oh,
10,
get.
yeah.
Yeah, okay, that makes more
Oh.
sense.
Acreage to create.
Yeah, that makes more
Okay.
sense. Little tidbit information.
Right.
Yeah, cluster development, got it.
So explain that. That's where you say there's this
So-
whole parcel, but you're only gonna develop in one portion of it?
Yeah, so this property is an urban reserve, and so it would be brought in at the next phase of the UGA expansion. But there's a couple challenges. One is, traffic on Indian Trail Road, how do you get down to 291 and yada, yada, yada. But with a cluster development, you can take, let's say if it's 10 acres per lot that you're allowed, you can go to a smaller lot development, but then you can't develop any of the rest of it. So that you average out for that same amount of land area, you're just consolidating the housing into 1 acre lots and stuff. So that is allowable in the GMA, it's allowable in our comp plan. So that's, because I was otherwise trying to figure out, wait a minute, this isn't in the UGA, how the heck are they getting? But that's how they're doing it, they're doing a cluster development.
580 acres,
Yeah.
58 homes.
58 homes, that's 10 acres per home.
But if they're spreading it all out across the entire acreage, keep it
Consolidated, yeah. Okay. That's the rest of the story. Thanks.
One more question is, have there been any similar decisions that the county's taken where a proposed development's kind of right outside the UGA and we grant water rights to that? I'm just looking at kind of precedent.
Well, with respect to our water right, this is the first time we've been asked to provide water so
So
nearby.
close,
Now, there have been other situations where the city is adjacent to other water providers. Kaiser South comes to mind, what I just recently went through with the most recent comprehensive plan amendments, where there, I believe, Whitworth and Water 3 and the city of Spokane were all next to this Kaiser South, which didn't have a provider. The developer was talking to all 3 different water providers at the time, and frankly, Commissioner, I'm not sure where he landed on that, but this is the first time that the county's been asked specifically for water in a location this near the city of Spokane's water service area.
Yeah, if you look at the previous slide, that shows the, how our water's been distributed. So like I said, it's mostly up near Deer Park, outside of the Deer Park city limits. But yeah, this is the first one that's been in that little sliver that's down on the south, split by the SVRP aquifer.
And I think you already touched on this, but just to make sure, the city did agree to extend water outside of its corporate boundary for a project on 291, wasn't it? Was that what ultimately was the golf course, or was there a different project?
They took on the water system from Suncrest, from
Right.
golf course,
Okay, that's
a
it.
number of
Yeah.
years ago.
Right,
And now there's interest in Bellevue up in that area, so
Right.
similar.
right, okay. Okay. So they pick and choose where they want to extend the water outside the UGA boundary?
Well, I'm not gonna characterize how, how
Well,
they
no,
do
that's,
that.
I mean, that's fine, it's their water, they have the right to do that.
Yeah, and then they can pick, and then some of these systems, they're less sophisticated systems, many times they need, maintenance work done on them or
Right.
whatever, in order to
Right.
take them on board.
Yeah. Okay,
Is that outside the UGA, the Suncrest example?
yeah.
I mean, it was a
Arsenic
failing, it
contamination.
was, it was a failing contaminated situation.
Yeah, and the one that's near the property we're talking about, there was an agreement in the 1990s
Yeah.
that the city decided that they would stick with. Because at first, my understanding is they refused until that was brought up.
Any other questions or concerns directed to this one?
You know? So that everybody understands what the request is and where we're going.
I might still have some questions, so I'll come back.
Absolutely, we're here.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
And the final public works item for us today, we have Ben Bradabo and Krista Riley here from our stormwater group. So we'll have them explain what has changed and why we're proposing this.
Yeah, thank you very much, commissioners. Appreciate the opportunity to present this. This is just a somewhat of an administrative request. It's that we charge a stormwater service fee in our stormwater service area, and in the 1990s, there was a court decision that says counties can't charge federal parcels that fee. And so we went through a process and found those and exempted them from being charged fees. And then in 2011, the Clean Water Act was amended and it allowed for those fees to be charged again. And so we're then now just catching up with that decision. We weren't informed, unfortunately, but we are aware of it now and are now coming to you to request a resolution to allow us to reverse that previous exemption and charge those stormwater service fees. There's 9 parcels. There's a list on the slide of who owns them. And it's approximately $20,000 per year. And it's one of those is about $18,000. That's the majority of those fees. Commissioner France.
Can we go retroactive, go all the way back to 97?
Great question. I actually don't know the answer. So as we were walking over here, we were talking about how far back we could go. I don't know, but we'll look into that.
Okay.
And that's it. So
If we could, we'd probably only be able to go to 2011.
yeah, that's a good point. We wouldn't be able to go before the decision, or before the amendment, but we can look to see if there's an opportunity to go back in time.
I can dream.
And so there'll be a board resolution to make that change. Any questions?
What federal parcels would this affect if it was approved?
So 9 of them, there's, looking at the list, Department of Energy, there's a large one. There's the big substation just south of the former Kaiser Mead facility. That's a really large, and the fees are charged based upon impervious surface. And so that's the one that's the $18,000 annual service fee. Krista, do you know specifically?
The second biggest one is the post office, up on the South Hill, and that's like $1,000. And the other ones are in the hundreds, I believe.
So consolidated would probably be out in
Yeah.
the Far Valley. Okay.
With the post office complex out at the airport. That's huge.
That's probably in the city of Spokane.
Yeah, I don't think it's within our service area.
That's in the city of Spokane. Darn city.
Al's just looking for money.
We'll take it.
Every couch cushion.
If this shakes anything loose, we need a pretty big easement from that Department of Energy site, so.
Oh, wow.
Anybody knows anybody at the Department of Energy?
All right, we'll look into the retroactive and then have a resolution for it.
So, not that I'm proposing this, but just for clarity, if it's on federal lands, would that include Fairchild Air Force Base?
It might, but I think they're, I also think they're out of our stormwater service area.
Yeah, they're not in our service area for sure.
Okay.
So our service area doesn't extend that far. I guess if it did, then it might be a while before that would happen. And
I wouldn't be a proponent, I was just looking for clarity around the
Yeah.
legislation.
They could potentially, because they have their own permit, their own like NPDES permit, we might not even be able to charge them.
Yeah.
because they're outside of our service area, so we wouldn't be able to anyway.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I see Kevin out lurking in the hallway there. So Kevin, you're up next.
Hi, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for your time this morning. Appreciate it. I want to talk about our Barracuda Network licensing renewal, contract renewal. We negotiated a 3-year agreement for email services, just completed that last week, 2 weeks ago now, actually, maybe 2 weeks ago. Had to seek out an emergency declaration to get that done in a timely manner. We'll talk about that in a minute. The new agreement will take us to mid-April 2026. The agreement is done. The plan is to move off of the Microsoft O360 or move to Microsoft O365 services and away from Barracuda before the end of this contract is done. So we won't have to go through this process again. History with our vendor, with Barracuda. We're a longtime customer of Barracuda Network Services. We've been with them since 2008. Services provided to the county are email threat protection, archival, retrieval, encryption, and an immutable backup, and again, encryption at rest, which is really important. Those are all really big things that we're trying to work through right now in as we move forward to thinking about retention services. As soon as we get some retention procedures in place, we can start thinking about moving off of our Barracuda contract. The previous contract that we had with Barracuda was from April 2020 through this last month, and the total spent on that was $165K. The current contract negotiation, which Sean took care of all of the negotiations with this, started in November of last year, and we completed that earlier this month. Sean was able to contract down from the initial price of $450,000 to $192,000. Part of the reason why we got down to that price was as we got closer to the date, we're able to get a much better price. But in so doing, we didn't leave ourselves a lot of time to get through the required purchasing processing steps of getting 3 other bids, and then also getting the agreement in front of the board before executing that. The budget impact of this is it's fully funded already. We've already got the funding for the entire 3 years, so we're good to go there. The need for the declaration request for this project is entirely based on Barracuda's. They would not allow us an extension, a grace period, to have the appropriate amount of time to get to the, you can go to the next slide, Gina, if you'd like, to get to the, they wouldn't allow us, we didn't want to have a lapse in service. We asked Barracuda if we could have an extension, a grace period of just 1 month. We've been a longtime customer of them. They refused that. I offered to pay for a month of service to give us time to get our contract in front of the board. They refused that as well. I believe, in looking back, we went through the same scenario 3 years ago. I wasn't part of that contracting, and as Sean wasn't either, but this is common practice, I guess, according to the reseller of licensing that we purchased through. So in talking with Tony Hall, he suggested that to prevent a lapse in service, that we go with the emergency declaration. A lapse in service would mean that we would have a break in our archival, our unmitigated, or our service, our archival service, our retrieval capability, everything with our email platform, which we just couldn't afford to do. Tony worked with me on getting the emergency declaration signed and put together. I had to answer about 5 different essay questions regarding that. Upon approval by Tony, this was passed on to legal, and Chris Anderson, thank you, Chris, stepped up and helped get this processed and through, and we were able to get the agreement in place in time to prevent a lapse in service, which many thanks to Tony Hall and Chris Anderson helping getting this done. Typically, when we do contracts with software vendors, we oftentimes come right up to that deadline of service, but with all other vendors, we're able to ask for an extension, ask for a grace period, because in good faith, we're negotiating with them. And Barracuda is the one company that we've never been able to get that grace period with. We are looking forward to moving off of Barracuda when we can, not just for this, but just because it'll save the county quite a bit of money, and we have the full capability of doing everything that Barracuda offers within our O365 platform that our exchange system is on now. So over the next 2.5 to 3 years, we will be moving in that direction. For the BOCC consideration, please consider an after-the-fact approval of the previously executed contract for security and services for our Barracuda networks for the next 3-year period. That's my ask. Any questions?
I'm gonna ask, so Chris, so then I guess this has been now vetted by legal to make sure that everything's.
As far as the underlying contract, I assume that it's gone through our standard review process and probably already was at the time. So yeah, I think that part is just fine. As far as the emergency part, it's relatively self-explanatory. As far as losing our capability to retain emails, the public records implications of that would have been borderline catastrophic. So the need for the emergency was very clearly there in my mind.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very
Anything
much.
else?
So is this on tomorrow's?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Thank you.
You figure about 2.5 years to get off of Barracuda?
Yeah, we're hoping that our goal is by the end of 2025, we'll be off of Barracuda. That gives us 4 months to make sure that we're off of Barracuda. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, next up we have George.
Yes, thanks. Adam's going to go ahead and give the presentation today.
Good morning, everybody. We had a brief conversation about the current CHG programs, and now we are going to talk about the programs that are applying for 2023 funds. Next slide, please. We'll give a brief background on the program. The Consolidated Homeless Grant, or CHG, provides resources for funding homeless crisis response system and supporting communities in ending homelessness. Homeless crisis response systems respond to the immediacy and urgency of homelessness and ensure that everyone has a safe and appropriate place to live. The Consolidated Homeless Grant has several funding sources, including state general funds and document recording fees. Projects awarded through the RFP will receive 1 year of contracts. Contracts will begin July 1st, 2023, and are scheduled to end June 30th, 2024. Awards considered for renewal will be brought up before the contract deadline. Next slide, please. We released the request for proposal on March 6th, 2023. We closed that at the end of the month. We received 15 applications. 10 of those applications passed staff review and threshold reviews. The total amount requested was 4.5 mil. The total funds available, 2.1 million. And of course, that funding gap left us larger than the total fund that we actually had to allocate. We had our Housing and Community Development Advisory Committee meet on Thursday, April 13th, where they went over and approved 7 total applications for final awards. these eligible use of funds, CHG funds, last time we spoke about HHAA, I know we had the question of what about preventative programs? CHG is really a big funder for our preventative programs. There are three main types of services. There's temporary housing interventions. This is our emergency shelters, transitional housing or temporary housing. There's permanent housing interventions as well. Our homeless prevention, rapid rehousing, and permanent supportive housing as well. And then street outreach, more of a direct and again, preventative service. Everyone who's eligible, this is through the Department of Commerce. They did raise the average median income eligibility from 50% to 80%. So these are homeless families who are eligible, as well as homeless household members with permanent disabled family members. Those are eligible for our permanent supportive housing units. And those at risk of homelessness and making at or below 80% of the AMI. Slide. This is just a brief overview of the 10 applications that did pass staff review. Catholic Charities submitted for St. Margaret's Shelter, the rapid rehousing program. The HCDAC did recommend that they get full funding at $262,000, $382. The second application for YMCA unfortunately did not receive any allocated award. SNAP received, as you can tell, very much shrunk reward. They were asking for 1.6, they received 419,000. And they were offering rapid rehousing and preventive street outreach. YMCA, their first and prioritized application, did get recommended full funding as well. YWCA, yes, sorry about that. Thank you for the correction. That was a bad slip. And then Volunteers of America, Alexandria House, were awarded their full ask, as well as Transitions, Miriam's House. And Commonwealth Agency, they had a really good application, but they are looking to build. And unfortunately, CHG does not allow for new contracts under the funding. But we did ask them to pay attention for future funding opportunities as well, because it was a really good and very interesting program. Cheney Outreach also applied and received additional funding. They will be able to add to their homeless prevention services. They received 100% of their ask. Family Promises of Spokane, they had another huge ask of just under $1 million. They were awarded $750,000 for homeless prevention. And then Salvation Army Street Outreach did not receive a final allocation from the HCDAC. As I said, we got 10 that passed threshold review, 7 were approved by the HCDAC for final awarding. All cuts were made due to prioritization for the HCDAC and how applications scored, and of course, what services they were going to be providing according to the gaps that we had compared to other homeless and prevention programs. And that is our quick briefing on this. We ask to move to approve the HCD recommendations for final votes.
Okay, so one of the questions I have is in our contracts as we look to award these, what kind of measurements are we putting in?
As far as making sure that accountability, attendance, so.
And that we're getting the outcomes that we're hoping to get.
Yeah, definitely. So we do manage everything through HMIS. I mean, that's basically a numbers program as well. So it's attendance services, people who attend certain programs. Obviously, it is a housing first model, so there's no way that they can force anyone to attend. But these kind of funding do allow for great programs to kind of incentivize people to come, community events, social gatherings, food, to really kind of get their services going. So it's a housing first model, but still with a lot of secondary programs that help to stabilize and then provide additional services for self-sufficiency moving forward.
Okay, so I guess in our contracts that we're putting out, because we've had discussions over time as to, you know, cities' contracts are different than ours and all of that, and we've taken it back over. I guess I'm just trying to make sure, how do we know that the people that we're giving grant money to in the future, when we look at how can we measure that they actually met the needs that we were that they were doing versus just giving them the money and we don't, do follow-up or any of that. So I guess that's what I'm just trying to.
Right. Well, the good thing about these programs is a lot of case intervention. So there is a lot of follow-up with the families. It's not really like a one-time kind of, here's some gas money, bye, we'll see you next week. And we also do track through everything through our desk monitoring. So I'm following up with the service providers as far as what's being met, what's not working for the programs, what kind of interventions do we need to either excel or to diminish. And then we also track the numbers through our neighborly program as well, which gives us the breakdown of, again, who's attending groups. Are we meeting certain benchmarks with Commerce as far as eligible participants, non-traditional, minority, and then that way we're making sure that we kind of are following those accomplishments and those guidelines through Commerce as well. But as you ask, there's a lot of these follow-up, especially, for example, Family Promise. It's a very intensive program where they're allowed to work with the family not only on the initial emergency, but then also make sure to stabilize and track them out. And then through that neighborly program, what we do is we're looking for unduplicated beneficiaries as well. So we know that we're not just giving out the money to the one family, right, or to one group of people as well. And then we're also working on mapping to make sure that we can map out where the communities are really accessing these funds, and then how we can best either make sure that we're allocating to the right project, to make sure that we're reading the right population in those areas, and then ultimately just making sure that our numbers start to shrink or at least start to correspond with our housing and remained housing numbers as well.
Okay, because I know when we had the continuing care 5-year plan, they talked about measurements and metrics and all of that, but we've never seen any of that come back to us. And so I guess that's part of why I'm just asking to make sure that as we put together contracts, that and it's just being transparent and accountable to those dollars, so that way we can almost use that as a future means of helping guide our funding decisions as well. So that's where I just would want to make sure that there's some kind of metrics that is just not here's the funds and we think you're going to do good work. It's here's the funds, but we want to know. We want specifically for them to come back or give us the data.
Absolutely.
To show.
And
Well, no, I was just to follow up on that. Did you look at, are there final reports from last year's funding? And then did you take that in consideration? If you funded this particular, I'm just picking on Volunteers of America, Alexandria's House. If we funded them in the past, did they serve the number of people that they said they were going to serve? And is that considered in the new RFP process?
Yeah, so we take a look at past performance to make sure that they're doing what they committed to doing in the contractual terms. I think that kind of moving forward, that's one thing that the IC as an opportunity for improvement in the past contracting is really more clearly calling out what those performance measures are and then how we're evaluating and monitoring those. I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve that. I think also something that I'd like to work with you all on is a reporting format and structure that gives you that information. So I know that oftentimes we come back and we just say, please approve these funding recommendations, but we also want to come back in between those cycles and say, here's where we're at, this is what you approved, and these are the outcomes and measures that we're seeing with these different contracts. So that's something that we're really evaluating in-house and trying to find a way to write those contracts so that our partners have that really clearly defined, and then it's also clearly defined when we come back to you all. So yes, we evaluate. Sometimes we have new partners coming in that haven't used these funds before, so that's a little tougher to evaluate. We do take a look at the overall agency as part of an agency risk assessment, so determine how they performed in other areas or other contracts that we've had with them. So that's all kind of part of that process there.
And I guess I want to, for clarity, to make sure, so these were funds in the past that we were passing down to the city of Spokane, we just pass them through. And so it's the last 2 years that we've, kind of not passed it through to the city of Spokane and decided to put the requests out ourselves.
Yeah,
So it's still, it's newer for us, and that's why I want to, that's why I just want to try to make sure that we are putting those metrics in. Because I know my understanding of the city of Spokane, there wasn't as many, there wasn't that as much. And so I just want to make sure that we're, making sure that they're putting the information into the system, HIMS, if I say it right. Because that should be part of the contract, that they have to put that into the system. So that way we can track it and those things and get some of those measurements. And so I just want to make sure that since we're newer at this, that we're putting those in.
yeah, and the contracts have the basic RCW requirements listed in there, but that's where I'm saying we can itemize it a little better, so it's not just an RCW reference to the homeless management information system entering, but also how we're gonna track that. So yes, these were previously administered. The county did pass those on to the city of Spokane for a period of time. We renewed those contracts as part of the city's 5-year commitment. And so this is the first time in several years that the county is really taking the lead on these consolidated homeless grant funds that come from the Washington State Department of Commerce, that we're taking those on ourselves.
So the Family Promise, they're really focusing on homeless prevention. And I can't remember, I don't know enough about HMIS, I know a little. But if someone's not actually homeless, do you enter them in HMIS? If you're preventing a family from losing their home or their apartment, I'm not sure if you would enter them in that system. They might have their own internal tracking system.
Yeah.
But I'm very interested in the prevention work, because that's so important, right? It may be less expensive just to keep somebody in their home than wait for them to actually become homeless and then eligible for homeless dollars. So I'm just wondering, I'd be curious to know how they're gonna track how many people they prevented from being homeless, because it's kind of hard to do that sometimes.
Yeah, in the homeless management information system, and that's kind of why the city changed the vernacular on that to the community management information system. So CMIS to kind of encapsulate more of the programming that's going into it, which includes homeless prevention.
So they are using it for that.
So they will, yeah, and they'll be required as a requirement of these funding sources to enter that information in there. So we'll have real-time data access on that.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how they spend those dollars, because Family Promise has really been trying to go upstream and prevent families from becoming homeless and getting to their shelter. So I know they've been trying to use data to try and track or identify families before it's too late. So it'll be good to maybe get an update on that. Are you requiring like a 6-month kind of report, or will there be any intermediary, like Commissioner Cuny was saying, kind of updates or outcomes or reports that are required?
Yeah, we're looking at that. So I don't know exactly if it's going to be 6 months, quarterly. We've made a commitment back to the Housing and Community Development Advisory Committee that we'll be bringing data back to them for future consideration on funding recommendations, because we want to do that.
But could we include that in the contracts?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yes.
So is this on for next week potentially then? For decision?
Yeah, we're asking that this go to the consent agenda for next week.
So is there still an opportunity to have some of that reporting put into the contracts with these agencies?
Yes, we haven't drafted the contracts at this time. We want to make sure that we get your approval and then any guidance to enter into those contracts. And after that, we'll do that.
Kat, you.
I just wanted to clarify that the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness and many of the federal and state funders are changing some of their definitions to include those who are at risk of homelessness in that, so that prevention piece can be, simultaneously addressed while they're working with folks who are technically homeless and then at risk of homelessness. There's been a huge push nationally for the prevention piece, as you were discussing, so I just wanted to clarify.
Any other questions? Thank you guys very much.
Thanks.
Okay, Doug.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Right, I have two items I'm here to brief on this morning. One of them, I guess the first item I will speak to is a promissory note related to the McPhee property acquisition. And you may have noticed in reviewing this, the approval, we've entered into the purchase and sale agreement, all of that has already come before you. The promissory note is an additional step, and Randy's over there. If you have any specific questions that I understand between Randy and legal is necessary and very, very helpful item for us to continue on the path to close and acquire this property on the timeline that we've set. And so we are looking to have this before you on the consent agenda actually tomorrow afternoon. And I believe our closing date is approximately May 18th, and we seem to be on track for that. And so happy to answer any questions. I know our legal's on board and Randy's here as well, related to the promissory note that would, again, facilitate a very short-term loan from the treasurer for us to complete the acquisition of the McPhee property. We're paying it back over a 3-year period of time with the Conservation Futures Fund and tax collected through that fund.
3 year or 5 year?
I believe 3, yeah. I know 3 years is what this is set at. We like to time it so the acquisition is completed before we open up for the next round of nominations, and we have about 3 years left. So I believe it'd be mid-26 when this would be all paid off.
So they're requesting the 3 years, not a 5.
Yeah, we've requested the 3-year time period, so that coincides with our next anticipated round of the program. We open for new nominations every 5 to 6 years, and this would time us just perfectly for that as far as sequencing and having the program in a great position for that next round. We're always looking ahead.
Al, if I may get the 5 is 5% interest. That may be what where you got the number 5 from.
I remember the 5% interest, and I also remember seeing an amortization schedule over 5 years. And so that's why.
It's semi-annual payments over 3 years, so there are 6 payments on that amortization schedule. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I was saying. Okay, never mind.
Yes, sir.
Never mind. Okay, I misread it. I thought it was annual, but it's not, it's biannual. Okay, thank you.
Any questions? Okay, super. My next item is to update our agreement that the county has with the Washington Trails Association. We've just wrapped up our first 5 years. They're a nonprofit organization that has been instrumental in completing work on repair and construction, repair of existing trails, primarily within our Conservation Futures properties, natural areas, as well as blazing new trails, if you will. And it has been a fantastic win-win, if you will, between the county over the last 5 years. We're looking to renew for another 5 with an automatic, one more automatic renewal after that in the next agreement. And to the way that the agreement is structured, they have effectively agreed to bring in anywhere from 10 to 15 volunteers to do a work party, and they commit not less than 100 hours of labor. And the county is guaranteed 3 times the value back in what we invest in this agreement. And so, for example, over the last 5-year period, we actually netted about 3.5 times the value for what we invested. So we benefited over $250,000 in work, and we contributed just over $72,000 towards that. And the agreement is formatted in the same way for the next 5-year period. We take the CPI into account, and we lean on the Recreation Conservation Office provides a value for that labor. So like right now in 2023, I believe it's $21 an hour. And so we pay a fixed $1,300 per work party. Of coordinate with them. Again, great benefit to the county. This will allow us to continue, and using the CPI index, it can increase as needed over time. And we're able to utilize the conservation futures maintenance and operation portion of the funds that we collect to often cover the cost of this investment. So it's really been a good relationship, and we're pleased to be able to continue that. And if this sounds good, we'll have this a week from tomorrow, I believe on the 9th, we would place this on your consent agenda. And happy to answer any questions.
Questions? So Doug, I'll just ask, so like, I've been to a couple of, I think the events where they're having volunteers come from all kinds of different groups to help
Right.
do trail maintenance, and so that's what this is helping.
Yeah, the WTA has full-time staff as a nonprofit, and they organize the work parties, the labor parties. They provide training, expertise. We have a point person that we can coordinate with our operations division. And it really is it's been a great win-win and very, very helpful, very successful. Very pleased with the results out there.
Thank you. And then I'm going to ask, so I was asked at the Learning Center opening that I see Mr. Knowles is not with you.
Yes.
Would you like to tell us what's happening?
I heard a little rumor.
Yes, Mr. Knowles, today is Mr. Knowles' first day as, let's see if I can get his title right, the Eastern Regional Trails Planner for Washington State Parks. Scooped him away from us, I'm afraid. So, yeah, it's gonna be a really, some really big shoes to fill. Probably take a little bit of time. So we're excited for Paul and his family. And he also, we do have an arrangement set up so he can work a little bit part-time for us for the next several months to help with that transition. A little bit here and there. For example, the McPhee property, he'll help us wrap that up, but he is officially started his new post today, so really gonna miss him. Been with our department, I think intern for 2 years and then full-time for another 14, and yeah, just anyhow, great success story.
No, yes.
Oh, I
Doug.
wish I could keep him, but yeah, so.
Well, but will you still, with his new position, will there still be some intersection with the county's projects, different trails or?
Be a little bit, we have, we're part of a really nice agreement related to the Centennial Trail. And so I'm fairly confident, this is a new role with state parks. And I'm fairly confident they will have him working as part of that. We have a coordinating council, and so I'm hoping I'll be able to interact with him on at least a monthly basis related to our efforts and the agreement we have with the state and other jurisdictions for the Centennial Trail. But yeah, beyond that, I guess we'll see with it being a new position. The state hasn't. They're working and excited to catch up as far as trails within their parks and just within their system. They haven't been able to dedicate as much attention to those compared with other state agencies, local agencies, that type of thing. So they're kind of building a new network of folks to help with that. So we'll be learning as we go.
I mean, yes, it's a huge loss for us and
Yes.
for the state. So I,
Yes, it is.
so yes, so if you could, I guess it's congratulations for him, because I think it's a good position for him. But if you can relay that to him, that
Oh, for sure.
he'll be missed here. We all really, relied on him a lot, as I know you did.
I certainly have.
So.
Doug, you're starting to sweat a little bit.
Things might slow down a little bit, but we're obviously going to be dialed in on key deadlines and have more major projects going than we ever have. So we'll be very optimistic we can find someone to help fill the shoes and get the ground running, but we'll cast the net out there. We've given it some time, and hopefully we'll have some qualified candidates. See.
Thank you.
So with that knowledge, do you still want us to pass this agreement?
Yes, please. This will help some of that work continue and keep it going.
No, I was gonna say the WTA, that's like it's a great idea. I mean, I worked at the Lands Council years ago, and I'm sure they use the funds to really help with their volunteer recruitment. Because it's a lot of work to just recruit and do those, find people to come, give them the skill sets to help it, with the trail building and rehab, and so that's a great program. They get some benefit. They get some money to probably pay volunteer and staff.
I think it helps the full-time staff quite a bit, and some of the supplies and materials and whatever they may do.
And it gives people in the
support
community the
them.
opportunity to get out there and help, in nature, and it's great.
Yeah, it's been fantastic.
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, that takes us to Scott Chesney.
They're working.
See Jessica
We'll
Colburn
find
with
a
us as
spot.
well.
Yeah, get us a shovel.
I don't know. You have to tell me
Come
what
on,
to do.
Amber. We can
I'll do it.
Come on.
Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for the time. We are following up on briefing of this year's comp plan amendments. As you have previously known, there are 17 that were adopted. Next slide, please. And they're generally spread out in fairly practical or typical areas for the last couple of years, a number on the West Plains, a number in the north side of the metro area, Meade area, and a couple on either side of the valley. Next slide, please. What's different about where we are today is, as I said, we had 17 of these come in. They range from UGA swaps to typical conversions to residential use. Some of them are more complicated than others, which is also fairly typical. But they're overlapping now with the beginning of the comp plan periodic update. You will be asked, the rest of this month, to initiate the formal study of the urban growth areas. I know that's something many of you have looked forward to for a while. That is essentially the formal kickoff of the comp plan update process. It takes place 3 years before the project or the plan is due in June of 26. What that means is while these comp plan amendments are still serving some needs, there's also the fact that you could be doing very small site analyses for projects that are going to be right back in the pipeline for the bigger picture comp plan part of this. And so what we wanted to do with you today was share a prioritized list of these that hits what we believe are your priorities, which is a continued provision of residential land for housing construction, and then defer some of these into the 26 cycle. So the action we're going to be looking or recommending is initiation of all of the comp plan amendments as they were suggested by the Planning Commission, but to split them into two groups, one for 23 and one for 26. Next slide, please. And we're proposing 8 of these to go forward in the 23 cycle. These are 6 that were submitted by landowners and applicants. The ones in bold are those we're recommending going forward into the 23 cycle. The remainder we're recommending be incorporated in the bigger analysis that will ultimately conclude in June of 26. The 2 that are not listed here are county initiated. One is CPA, or will be CPA 15, which is the residential plats and subdivisions that were previously approved when residential was allowed in light industrial uses on the West Plains, and these would rezone them back into the LDR classifications that they have already built out to. We feel it's a right sizing thing. It provides those landowners with some ultimate protection being in the zone they should be in. So far we've not heard any controversy about that from any of our partners. And then one other 17, which is the 5 Mile Prairie plats that are on a tighter schedule because of trying to become back into compliance with the Growth Management Act. These were left out of the settlement agreement, and we need to bring them in this year's cycle. So that's kind of the nutshell of where we were breaking these out. As I said, the priorities are to provide more residential land for housing that can go forward, in a shorter period of time, and then consider the others in that broader context of the rest of the comprehensive plan itself. And I'd be happy to go through and refresh where these are if you'd like, or we can simply take questions. We've got some maps if you'd like to see them.
So we talked either last week or the week before last about the idea of coming back and modifying the light industrial zone to allow for housing in those areas that are outside of the overlay zones for Fairchild, Phelps, SIA, Deer Park, Meade. Have you given any, because some of these fall into that category, and I know that there's interest out in the West Plains in providing more housing, especially on the south side of I-90 and stuff. So have you had a chance to think about that? And
if Commissioner, if these were lands within an existing UGA,
right, they are,
and were somehow determined that had been not adequately used in, say, the 20 years or so they've been in light industrial, they would be good candidates for that. There are a couple others that have come in specifically on the north side that are, the underlying plan is part of a Lambert, but it's a light industrial overlay. And because that one is not in a UGA, there's virtually no way for us to make that one, or those kinds of light industrial come in for residential, because there'd be no way to provide urban services outside of the UGA. But a study of those on the West Plains would at least have the components available to this group to change that policy to allow residential in light industrial, or in limited light industrial with those certain parameters.
so for the benefit of my fellow commissioners, prior to me getting here, they did update the light industrial zoning category, and when they did that, they allowed for multifamily residential development to happen in the light industrial zone, not realizing that some of the land adjacent to SIA as light industrial could be converted into apartments, and that then created a conflict. And so the board at that time came back and issued a moratorium and said, oops, and then eliminated all residential and light industrial zones as their fix, which then took off the table a lot of other otherwise underutilized light industrial zones that could have been used for industrial residential. It basically put those off, took them off the table and put them into limbo. So that's what it was trying to do, is we now have overlay zones around all of the airports to say you can't put residential in the overlay zone. Great. But how about the other zones? Is there a way to kind of come back and get more residential development in some of those underutilized light industrial zones? That's what the conversation was about.
And to add on to that, the SIA overlays are very specific on the residential component in drawing a distinction for those lands south of I-90 versus those north of I-90, which are more directly affected by the control surfaces.
Anyway,
But can I just ask, follow up on that? So these, the orange, the outlined areas that you're talking about moving back to.
Are you on 15?
On 15, yeah. Are those already, it says that, there's Crystal Meadows, Maple, so were they already platted
Yes.
as residential?
Yes.
Oh, so you're just kind of saying this is already.
In that use.
Okay.
We're not recommending
They were
a change
built, or they
of
were,
that.
they were
They were
platted during
grandfathered,
that
yeah,
time.
they were
Okay.
platted and already effectively grandfathered in, invested in.
Okay.
Now, the one additional step that comes to mind on what you're describing is that would also add to the UGA analysis, because you'd be thinking about that conversion in a different way. It wouldn't be specifically on a 20-acre parcel. It would be on a more universal part of light industrial.
I'm just trying to figure out how to get more housing while we're waiting on UGA.
And I guess for the purposes of where we are with the Planning Commission, That would be a separate action that we would tee up and take back to the planning commission and bring back to you for further consideration. If you're still comfortable going forward with the planning commission's recommendations on these.
Well, I just wanna learn more about these, probably, before we do anything more, right?
Sure, of course.
So I just had a question about the 17. I understand, it's got the urban densities and, you know, this is part of the settlement agreement. What does that mean, study areas to swap in accordance with BOCC resolution number? I don't understand that part of it.
These are.
You'd have to swap it because you're adding.
Correct. We are not able to unilaterally add to the UGA at this time, but we can swap parcels. So we have to essentially find 88 acres that is in the UGA that we can take out because it has no or very little likelihood of residential development in the next 20 years. And we've got at least a couple of good candidates, notably the memorial gardens and cemeteries along Fort George Road Lake. Because they're zoned LDR, and I
So
think we can
over the
assume they
next-
won't develop.
If we accepted the initiation request for this one, over the next 6 months, you'd be looking for those areas to
Yes.
swap? Okay.
Yes.
Would that help with any of the other swap requests?
Not necessarily, because they're sort of self-packaged, 10 acres for 10 acres or like for like. But they also are more complicated in the fact that we had challenges from FutureWise in the recent past on making those swaps happen. And those, they will end up taking more time. They will very likely be challenged at the end. We would simply have to assume they would be. And so they seem like a better request to be put into the bigger study of the UGA.
I
Genie
know
in
Spokane
particular.
Valley really wants that. I know they've been, you know, pushing on that UGA swap, but you're concerned that the swap language is just not defensible? I mean, I'm
the
just
Spokane-
curious. I didn't even know that there was this swap ability from my previous time on the city council. Is it a new addition to
It's
the?
more explicitly new in the
Oh, okay.
recent legislative session, but there's been sort of an implicit assumption from the very earliest UGAs that were created without urban designations. Where it's like, well, let's put this next to Airway Heights and hope something good happens. There was some sense of you could do a like for like swap in the past that was challenged for that. But then the legislature in the session before last allowed for those swaps based on development patterns, not just on population projections. So we do have the ability to move these around.
But you think these two, the reason why you haven't bolded these to move forward is that it's gonna take some more time to
It is.
do that
and-
analysis?
It will, on each of them, even though they're relatively small, the size doesn't matter when you have to go through the same analysis, whether it's 10 acres or 200.
So Scott, one question I have is like on the swaps and stuff too, is that if we're not gonna allow, we're gonna push everything, you know, that 2023, and then we're gonna push the ones that are not highlighted into 2026. Are we still gonna allow people to put in 2024?
We would be requesting that the board would not do a CPA cycle in 24 or 25. Because at that point, once we get in, well, this year, the work, we'll be working on the land capacity analysis, the land quantity analysis, and the UGAs. That'll consume the rest of the year. What will come out of that, presumably at the October meeting of the steering committee, is a set of UGA study areas, much like the county did in 2013. They will be guided by compliance principles that we will be putting in there. So we'll be looking at areas for the UGA to grow this year. But in terms of comp plan amendments, once we get into 24 and 25, it's going through the enormous complexity of what's being asked of us and every other county with new legislative changes for housing, for environmental justice, for greenhouse gas emissions. And even though we are in talks with CEO about upstaffing our department to make those things happen, there's just only so much you can really do with any of that in one group. And so the individual CPAs are just kind of out of cycle if you're looking at the entire area as a whole.
Because instead of doing the individual ones, then we'd be looking at them, but we'd still want them to to be informing us, so we
Absolutely.
know.
Absolutely, and we've done that in an informal way. The settlement agreement currently prohibits us from accepting an application for a UGA expansion. However, as all of us know, we get those questions all the time, and so what we've done is simply say, send us a letter of interest, identify the parcel, and tell us what you've got in mind, and we're putting them in a file that we will crack open as we do this analysis in '23. So we're trying to let the world know that we are going to be looking at these, although we can't take a formal application right now. And in that sense, it's easier on them. A formal application is pretty complicated for the property owner too.
And for what it's worth, when we do these major updates, the GMA requires that we engage with the public. And part of that public engagement is getting that feedback to say what areas of our land use do you think we need to change and modify. So even without a formal initiation process for things to consider in 26, that public engagement is supposed to kind of ferret out those ideas from the public and developers on what they think the best use of our land is.
So what then will be the formal cutoff date for interest in being included in the UGA expansion in 26? But we have to have a hard date to say, if you're not in by this time,
That's actually a
sucks to be
harder-
you.
If it were a normal cycle, it would very likely be July of this year. Because that gives us a chance to work through something for the steering committee's consideration in October, and it can be modified again in January. Given that we're under the settlement agreement, we simply can't accept that formal application, but we can continue to accept those letters of interest.
But the settlement agreement actually doesn't bind us for regular update years.
Right.
So we can expand the UGA for that. But also, and just to add to what Scott's saying, the GMA contemplates that you adopt public participation guidelines. And there's two ways it contemplates it. One, that you have a standalone kind of always applies PPGs, but also you can adopt singular PPGs for major update processes. So as part of this 2026 update, Scott's team can adopt a public participation guideline to apply to the 2026 update, which would outline exactly that, when the cutoffs are, how we'll receive things, how can people comment on things. And that's part of what his team might look at doing.
So if you don't have an official cutoff date, then people can apply to be part of the process all the way up until you adopt the comp plan update, which means you're going to be chasing these puppies all over the horizon because you'll never be able to do your global analysis because you keep on having these applications coming in. So you've got to have a hard cutoff somewhere.
We agree. We just hadn't thought about a specific date yet, but when you lay it out and say we're about to come back to you to have you initiate that UGA study, that's going to at the very least suggest that the July steering committee deadline, maybe the 19th, is a hard deadline for submitting those letters of interest. And then what would play out through the public participation cycle through 24 and 25 is identifying those pieces, and that doesn't mean they can't shift or move during that period of time. So yeah, there's some desire to know where we stand when we start, but there's also the evolution of once we know more about our growth numbers, which we'll get in April of 24, some of the other patterns of development that are out here, that's going to inform and guide us, the Planning Commission, and you on how these UGAs need to be shaped.
But there's also the part of the SCEO's involvement as well. So remember that, that's going to be meeting this entire time. And even without a formal application process, you're going to have these jurisdictions who are going to be vying for, which piece of the pie do they get as far as the population allocation. So there's no need for a formal process for that. And additionally, you're going to have public participation mandated all the way throughout. So as you're kind of going forward, this is going to be kind of an evolving process where the public can say, oh, I see that you've recommended this. And when I say the public, obviously any stakeholder group, I see you're recommending this, have you considered this different approach? And that doesn't require a formal application process. That public participation and recommendations can be considered throughout.
When we went through this in 2011, 12, 13, we had binders of applications. We went property to property and looked at. And and that was less information required then than you require now. So filling up that binder is not something you do overnight. That has outside consultants that have to be brought in and yada, yada, yada. So at some point, you've got to have a cutoff date.
Understood. We'll figure out what makes the most sense for that. Bring that back.
Then we gotta advertise the heck out of it.
Oh,
But I guarantee you, the week after the cutoff date, you're gonna get an application. Guaranteed. So that's what I'm trying to avoid, is that dragging out the county, when it adopted in 2013, they were years behind because they kept on getting more applications.
We are in the beginning of designing what that UGA amendment analysis process is going to look like. And as I said, you're getting a request to initiate that like these, which is to simply give your formal direction back to us to do that work. But then you'll see that on a regular basis as we come back and report progress.
So today, I'm putting this saying, these are the ones that you're requesting that we move forward to the planning commission for them to do their due diligence work on these comp plan amendments. And the ones that are not highlighted are the ones we wouldn't be forwarding onto the planning commission.
Right, the motion is on, actually it's on your agenda for tomorrow, is to initiate these as recommended by the planning commission, but then draw them into two groups, a 23 group and a 26 group. We will be asking you tomorrow to continue that resolution for 1 week so that we can make sure we've incorporated this briefing into that resolution and bring you, get that to you in the right time to do that. But yes, that's what's coming before.
Okay, and so that's really kind of the big change from normal is that
Yes.
we're gonna say some of these we're just gonna delay until 2026. And then it'll still be going through the process, at the planning commission and coming back to us for final approval.
Yes, that process will not change. And that final approval could be September or thereabouts.
For the ones that are this year.
Correct.
Have you had an opportunity to have a conversation with Commerce about, in this cycle, truing up the UGA boundary to reflect what actually is already developed?
Not yet. We've had a very abstract version of that because, as you're sort of hinting to, that was how a big part of Spokane County got sideways in 2013 to 2016. There is every reason to be considering that, though. The property we were just talking about, this industrial property that's over a Lammert, that whole developing Mead area is essentially urbanizing and mostly urbanized, but it's not in an urban growth area by definition. So we would really like to right size the map again, but we're going to have to do so in a way that Commerce is our partner on.
So do you have more discussion or description of why you're proposing, I get the 2 Spokane County requests, but the other 6 that you bolded, are you gonna prepare to outline why those versus not the other ones for 23 through?
Our apologies. In our previous briefing, we kind of went through that broad slide-by-slide version of that for planning commission and stuff, but essentially, all of these that we're recommending going forward meet the basic criteria of eligibility for being considered as a comprehensive plan amendment.
Right.
We haven't done the detailed analysis because we wait to give the applicant the benefit of the doubt that if you, the board, initiate them, then they go on the clock to produce the big, thick application itself. Until now, they've sent us fairly sketchy information. And they pay a little fee, they pay a bigger fee if you agree to send them forward. And we do that just to be fair to them.
Then they have to make their case. Okay. But some of these that you're saying, let's wait till 26 is because of the swap issue and then some of them
Sometimes
are
it's
just not,
complications.
there's something with the land use, it's not appropriate.
Well, it may not be appropriate, but we don't know that for sure yet, but what we've seen in in our early versions and sometimes our previews with the city, with STA, Commerce and other, and DOT, is that there will be more complicated issues to move those forward. This is a year when we are very busy with all sorts of things.
Yes.
And
Oh, I agree.
we tried to think of a way of prioritizing things that are still important to you, which is housing. And look at those that are fairly straightforward and seem to be good candidates for approval, and put the more complicated ones just on the side to handle in the bigger analysis.
Any other questions?
Because I have not gone through this before. What kind of workload is required for the county staff to process all of this? Even with the limited scope, or the more focused scope?
Limited scope, this will be about a 1.5 to 2 person job, full-time from now until September. And it would be more than 2 if we tried to do all of these. And right now, we're at 2, and we're proposing to grow that for some very specific things.
What are those two? Those are a particular type of planner.
We have a long-range group in planning, and then what's called current planning or land use planning that handles the platting process and the actual land development side. And then the long range handles comprehensive plan amendments, the periodic update, code improvements, and updating the development regs. So there's the longer range or bigger picture.
And we have 2 of those now.
We have 2. The county's had more in the past. They've had less. It's gone up and down. In this case, part of the reason that we're at this stage is we pushed people into our land use side because we were running slow on permitting times and wanted to make those things happen, recognizing that this was coming. But also the changes that are being requested of us or mandated to us by the legislature, now Commerce, Growth Management Hearings Board, is there's far more to do with this plan update than there was the last time around. And not to be trivial about it, but you can't just change the date on this one and say it's good. There's a lot of this that's going to be starting out with a blank sheet of paper and creating the entire thing. So it will be more complicated. We're looking at balancing a couple things to do that. Adding some permanent staff that will have eyes on this as it goes through the system, and then to help implement it as it goes past that. Subject matter experts that will be consultants on specific things that have that expertise that we don't acquire. And frankly, partners. There are other staff in the department that work on things like transportation planning. That Kyle and I haven't really had this conversation yet, but we're going to be talking about how we can partner with them and co-opt some of their time to work on the transportation elements for the plan, for example. And also, in the past, the PTAC, the planners group, has not always been as cooperative. Sometimes it gets a little competitive. And we've tried to build a pretty good relationship with that group over these last couple of years. That's a group that can be shared resources so that we can tap some of that group. And so we can add a smaller number of staff on the county payroll, but look at all of tapping these other resources to bring that expertise into this.
A lot of the elements that we're going to have to comply with right now, I can say fairly comfortably that I'm not sure that there's a county in the state that has a clue how they're going to do it. And this is going to be new technology, new approaches, have not been tested in the court, have not been, and so we are going to be guinea pigs in a big experiment. And no matter what we do, it's going to get challenged in court. And the courts are going to spend years. She'll be ready to retire by the time we're done. Talking to some of the other commissioners across the state, we're looking at the legislation, and we're looking about how the heck are we ever gonna be able to do this? And where's the expertise to be able to do it? Climate change initiative, I mean, there's no expertise to be able to generate that. We don't know how it's gonna get developed, and we don't know how much it's gonna cost. So there's a lot of unknowns.
We have really two other advantages that some of the other counties don't have. One, and as you've all been a part of, we've kind of rebuilt the planning reputation within Wasac and also with our chapter planners because of the CFP and other issues going on. But even though we're on a tight timeline to 26, the Puget Sound counties have to get this done in 24, others have to get it done in 25. Since we've partnered up with King County, for example, we're gonna be able to learn what they learn a little bit faster than have to recreate it ourselves. So that's yet another way of leveraging others' knowledge on some of these things that we can say, okay, we don't need to do this gigantic thing that works in King County with millions of people, but here are the basic elements and we can adapt these and maybe not have to create that ourselves. So if they say flattery is plagiarism, we're gonna try to make friends with our fellow counties that are ahead of us in line.
We may have talked about this, but can you remind me if we have a sense that whether that new legislation comes with resources and how much and when that would be coming?
Some of it does, as far as we know. The commitment that is, I would say is absolute. Last year's legislature funded the periodic update itself. Spokane County will get $700,000 somewhere early in 24. So you get that 2 years before you're due.
Okay.
And the climate bill, the number we have heard is the 1181, the climate bill will come at a county, Spokane County size will be $650,000 to focus on that particular element. I have not heard of any other funding for the housing bill or other things. And some part of the housing bill was focused more on cities than counties, but there's going to be this spillover effect because it'll happen in our urban growth areas. So there's some resources.
We may want Mike to do a little research on that if we don't know the exact date of when that funding will be received.
So, but knowing that those funds are coming, so you're thinking the current long-term planners you have will start to work on, these comp plan amendments.
Right.
And also we're still trying to figure out other pieces of the settlement agreement and the CFP. But you'll be looking to source new staff and partnerships or contracts.
Right.
Knowing that we have these elements that we'll need to address.
Sourcing and training will be our key
Right.
once we have an agreement to come back to you for funding.
So you're working on kind of a proposal
Yes,
on that, okay.
that will be coming forthwith. No time to waste.
Thank you, appreciate the update.
Thank you. I'm gonna take it to Randy Bishop. Budget amendments.
We do.
Yep.
You guys good?
Whoa.
All right, commissioners, we got a few items for you today. The first one is going to be some budget amendments, clean up for 22 and start with 23, and I'll have Tessa go through that.
Perfect, we'll start off at the top and go through, we're gonna start in the general fund. We have two amendments relating to 2022 year-end financial information. The first is water bank, some additional revenues and expenditures that needed to be recorded in the general fund. Public Works Finance manages the water bank for us. And then the second item there is related to FEMA and things related to the COVID emergency. And this was an accounting year-end cleanup style entry that financial services had us make.
On that, I'm just gonna ask the question, so it's coming out of fund balance, but are we anticipating that we're gonna get reimbursed for that?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
We just had to record an expense in 22 to move money to cover the FEMA expenses, while we wait for FEMA to pay us back. Thank you. Item number 3 is for 2023 related to elections. This is the purchase of some election services capital and then elections charges fees, and we'll recuperate that money.
And for 23, we did not budget any of the equipment replacement revenue, nor did we budget the expense, because that in the past had overinflated how much we budgeted in elections. And so this is now budgeting that revenue, the portion that we will receive in 2023.
Based on the known expenditure we need to make. So usually I had been for a larger amount, and so we are trying to do it true to what we'll really spend. Item number 4 is $3.9 million for the Real-Time Crime Center. That is the full award from ARP funds. We were unsure how much the Sheriff's Office was going to spend initially in this first year, as there were quite a few startup costs related to buying the camera equipment and stuff like that, getting the program going. So we did go with the full amount, and then we will carry it forward into future periods. On to the next page, item number 5.
Can I ask a question about that?
Absolutely.
So is it normal to appropriate it even if we haven't we haven't approved, we don't know all the contracts we'll be approving in the next year?
Right.
But
So
just to
yeah, so we
it
have to have
as a
the
line.
budget set up for
From
them to
which-
spend off of.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Item number 5 are some vehicles for the Sheriff's Office out of their DUFB. That is an acronym, Designated Unreserved Fund Balance. In the general fund, certain accounts are set up to kind of track special revenues for special purposes. In this case, it is state and federal seizure funds that are being tracked for a special purpose, and one of those allowed uses is vehicle purchases. Item number 6 is related to the Centennial Trail. This is under Parks and Recreation. Various revenues and interests are being appropriated to match the cash balance for the Parks Department to manage a portion of the Centennial Trail. Item number 7 is the Avista Stadium improvements. This is an appropriation of fund balance in the general fund to transfer from the general fund to the capital project in Fund 303, which we will see here in a minute. Now we're going to move on to other funds. Yeah.
That's just capturing the maximum amount. They still have to do the match.
Correct. Yep. So yeah, we'll see the match here in a minute as well. Thank you. So item number 8 is the first in our other funds category. This item is related to 2022, and this is in our 911 fund. Additional 911 revenues were received, and we passed those revenues on to Shrek for their management. Item number 9 is related to 2022 year-end REIT alignment. We had some projects, we received additional REIT funds, so we were able to cash fund some parks projects that were going on last year. Item number 10, year-end Shrek payment out of the Emergency Communications Sales Tax Fund. We again received significantly more money than we had originally anticipated, and we're able to appropriate those to pass through to Shrek for their management of the emergency communication system. Next page, item number 11, related to 2022, in Fund 218, that is the Medical Lake TIF Debt Fund. We received more revenue in incremental taxes than we had anticipated, and so we were appropriating those to make debt payments, paying down accrued interest on the Medical Lake TIF. Item number 12, 2022 capital project closeouts. In the capital projects fund, there was additional interest received that we needed to transfer back to REIT to close out various projects. Item number 13, 2022 related still. Under the stormwater utility, they had some additional capital projects that were able to be expensed in 2022, so they appropriated fund balance to get that work done. Item number 14 is where we start in 2023 for our other funds. This is the treasury loan that Doug briefed you on earlier. for Fund 117. This is receiving the proceeds in the amount of $2.2 million to purchase certain real property. Item number 15 is the Avista Stadium Capital Project in the Parks Capital Project Fund. This is $16 million, which is $8 million transferred in from the general fund and then $8 million from Long Ball. Item number 16 is for the landfill closure fund. They needed to purchase a truck that they had not anticipated buying, so they're appropriating fund balance to do so. Item number 17.
Time out.
Oh, yep.
So are you saying that Long Ball has already put in the $8 million?
They have not put in the $8 million yet, but we are setting up the budget for the project to receive all $8 million as it comes in. So instead of coming back to you at the payment schedule intervals, we thought it would be easier to come to you once, have the budget appropriated, and then as cash flow comes in, we'll manage spending.
I'm just looking for status. Thanks.
Item number 17 are our PO rollovers. So these are purchases that were encumbered in 2022. They did not, we didn't receive the item in time, goods, services, etc. And so we rolled the budget into 2023 to be able to expense those items in 23. There are various different departments because we did adopt the budget in 2023 at the agency level. We have itemized at the agency level for the general fund as well as each other fund on the next page, Rebecca. And so that is about $11.5 million in total, $8.2 million in the general fund. A lot of these items, the large ones you'll see in the general fund under like the sheriff or their sheriff's vehicles that were not received in 2022. They have already, I think, started to be received in 2023. So we are making those payments now. And then on to the next page.
Can I just ask a quick question? So when you guys are looking at this, do you check in, I'm a newbie, do you check in with each department, just kind of see, oh, are you still planning to, is that still gonna be purchased or is that still gonna happen?
Yes.
End of the year. So these are all that they're anticipating this was,
Purchase orders
that
that
they,
they've already entered.
it just hasn't been delivered or, yeah,
Or
okay,
paid for yet.
or paid for, okay.
Perfect. And then on page 5, all the rest of the items 18 through 31 are grants or contracts that the board has already accepted on behalf of the county, and this is just the budget amendment to match the acceptance of those various awards. Any other questions? So this will be a preliminary hearing next week, and then final hearing 2 weeks after that. And then I will be at the final hearing again to represent the items in case there are any other questions between then and now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, the next item should be just the first quarter results. Supposed to brief that a couple of weeks ago, let you know where we were at. Which I wasn't feeling too well, sorry about that. But basically, a couple of pages here, one page on revenue. I'll go to the next page. So on the revenue, just kind of where we were at the first quarter. Of course, sales taxes, we're looking about where we have budgeted. We seem to be on track, and we'll let Jason talk a little bit more about that after this. We'll go through our April presentation. Property taxes, of course, we collected very little in the first quarter because those aren't due until April 30th, which would be May 1st. So today we'll get the big influx of cash from that. But overall, from a revenue standpoint, when we're looking at the general fund, we seem to be on track for what we have budgeted. Right now, we don't anticipate any major shortfalls or any major overages at this time. The next page, as far as expenses, for the year, our percent of budget, 22 to 23, we're really at the same percent that we spent in the first quarter. So based upon historicals and where we're at, looking at some of the one-time expenses that have occurred in the first quarter. Again, we don't anticipate any major differences between what we budgeted and what we will actually spend. So at this time, I don't foresee, I'm sure things will come up, but at this time, we don't have any big needs that we would raise flags on. So good news is from the revenue side, I don't think we need to make adjustments yet, one way or the other. I don't know that we have to make adjustments down. The revenue looks good. I don't see having a lot extra. And from the expense side, we seem to be tracking. So for the first quarter, I think the results are what we expected, and that's it. Any questions? All right, and then we'll have Jason go through the April sales tax receipts.
So April's sales tax numbers were a little softer than we anticipated. It's actually the first time we decreased year over year since 2020. So it's not the best month, but we're still looking pretty good. We're still looking all right. So year over, so it's 5.1, 5.2 million. It was a negative growth of 1% year over year for the month. For year to date, for 2023, we're at about 23.5 million, which is about a 3.6% increase year over year, which we put that over 2022's actuals, puts us just barely above what we budgeted. So I think we're right on track. And the next page just shows the numbers we have for regular sales tax, the criminal justice sales tax, juvenile jail sales tax, and public safety sales tax, which are right on track with about what we budgeted. The next page, the indicators, right? So we made a slight change in this report. So you see on the three circles, on the second one, it'll show where we are year over year for the month. And then the third circle would be year over year, year to date. So for residential building construction, 4.7% year over year for February, but year to date, 14% over. So that's pretty good. For non-residential construction, for February, not the best month, right? So 12.4% lower year over year, but still 7.3% higher year to date. The next page, this is where it starts to not look as good. New vehicle sales, you can see the figures, year over year at 10.2% lower for February, and year to date 3.3% lower. And the reason we look at these indicators a little bit more is since it's a little more discretionary spending. Used vehicle sales, they're up. So typically when the used vehicle sales are up and the new vehicle sales are down, shows that people are trying to cut back a little bit. They still need a car, but they're not gonna buy a fancy one. The next page, repair and maintenance. So it's about on trend. People are spending about what they anticipate, or what we anticipated rather, for auto repair and maintenance. The next, retail trade for other motor vehicle dealers, that, as you can see, was really terrible. Right? So all that discretionary income that people may have seems to have disappeared. They're not spending it on this anyways. So a 33% reduction year over year for February, and year to date, almost 23% lower.
So that includes RVs. Does that also include like boats, motorcycles?
I'm not sure about boats. I'll have to look at that. But motorcycles, quads, RVs. I'd have to see if boats are in that category. I'll check it out and find out.
Okay.
Send it to you. But all the fun stuff, pretty much, that people want to buy, they're not buying. So accommodation, food services, full service restaurants seem pretty flat for February. Year over year, about 12% higher. For limited service restaurants, pretty much where we thought, 6% higher year over year, 11% higher year to date. The next category, drinking places, looks like people that didn't go to the fancy restaurants still bought booze, and decided to spend their Valentine's money on that. That's 7.5% higher year over year. The retail trade beer, wine, liquor, that almost never changes, which is pretty telling. So, all right, and then the next category. So the top 3 economic sectors.
Right.
Retail trades are largest ones, so to show negative growth is really, it's a little concerning. I mean, it's not a huge drop, but considering we very rarely ever drop, should be a little cautious on the spending. But so again, 2% year over year, year to date, just barely above. Construction, not as bad as retail trade, so that's good. Year over year, 13.5% higher year to date. And again, accommodation and food services, 3.5% higher for February and 13% higher. But we're still on track to hit our.
Yeah, so Jason said year to date, for the first 4 months, we're still slightly above where we expect our budget to be, but we do see some softening. So I think by about June, in a couple more months, we'll probably have a better vision of where the year is gonna end, because it has softened. And our biggest collection months are in the last half of the year versus the first half.
So, WASAC, the Legislative Steering Committee 3 weeks ago had the budget office come in and talk to us about how they were doing budgeting for 23 and what they were planning for 24. And they were saying that they fully expect that we'll be into a recession by fourth quarter of this year and 24. So
that's kind of what it looks like,
yeah,
what we're seeing also. So for next year's budget, we don't anticipate, right now, I would say we will not have a 3.9% growth in sales tax next year.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
That's it. That's it. No questions.
Any questions?
Thank you. Next up is Scott.
Good morning, everyone.
I just have to say, I've got a GSI, I don't know, whatever your committee is, executive committee meeting at 2, so I'll be early, so if we're still going, I'll let you take over.
Rebecca, could you go to the PowerPoint presentation? So Commissioners, I'm going to walk you through kind of an update on this opioid abatement council. We've been continuing to meet internally with a group of our team to evaluate kind of our next steps. So just for some refreshers, this is one of the steps that we have to do as part of the opioid settlement. So the settlement dollars were negotiated. Washington State and local jurisdictions are receiving dollars. To date, we've received about a little over $1 million from two different tranches. One is from the manufacturers. We received about $890,000. Another one is from another manufacturer through I believe it's another manufacturer through a trust, and then we haven't received the first installments from the distributors, if you will, the pharmacies and whatnot. So these dollars are going to be coming to local participating jurisdictions over 15 to 18 years. All of the percentages, which we'll show you here, are set, but the dollar amounts are not completely known yet. So as we get these dollars, we continue to update our tracking sheet so we know how much monies are coming in and available for programs. So one of the things, and also in your document, you'll see the One Washington
MOU that was developed for how to, what the local participating jurisdictions need to do, what the responsibilities of them are, what the needs of setting up an OAC are. It lays that out pretty well. And then there's also eligible uses in your packet, which we've shared before. And there's all the percentages by Washington, counties, cities who are getting these dollars over the 15 to 18 years. So one of the first things that we do, that the local participating jurisdictions are required to do is set up a regional opioid abatement council. And these regions are established in the One Washington MOU. I believe there's 9 regions in Washington state. Our region is stipulated as far as what the participating counties and cities are. And we'll share that with you in a minute here. But it does require us to set up a regional opioid abatement council by July 1. That is developed from these local jurisdictions. And in the One Washington MOU, it specifically states that 10% of the dollars that each of the local participating jurisdictions receive are to be basically set aside and reserved for use by the OAC up to their actual costs that they incur. We go to the next slide. We also, as part of this Regional Opioid Abatement Council, there is a board composition that has to be established. We've got a really great example from the North Sound region and how they set their composition of their board. They have a number of counties involved, a number of cities as well. So one of the things that we're working on is basically, what did Scott say earlier? Flattery is plagiarization. We're using that agreement as a kind of a starting point for what we would recommend for our board and the other local jurisdictions to consider. And it does call for the board membership. They have to have certain knowledge in the industry. They have to have, as you can see, research, prevention, education, training, treatment, support recoveries of how we can actually use them. But people who are serving on the board have to have work or educational experience in one of those categories. So go to the next slide. This shows you all of the counties and cities in our, what's defined as the Spokane Regional Opioid Abatement Council. So there's six counties and 4 cities. All 4 of the cities, these are the local participating jurisdictions that opted to receive money directly. There's a total of 10 jurisdictions in our regional OAC. And those percentages are essentially what's going to be over the life of receiving these dollars. These are the percentage that each of the jurisdictions will get. So the largest one is Spokane County. We're over 50% of those dollars coming into our region. City of Spokane's about 30%, and you can see the rest of them in there as well. Okay.
That's based on population.
No, it's based on a number of things, based on how many cases they had, how much drugs were actually, opioid came into the counties, the cities. It was a very complex development of a calculation that was handled by the class action attorneys. Okay, this gives a quick rundown of the duties of the OAC. I won't go through all of the items, but essentially the regional OAC has a couple of responsibilities. They are responsible for overseeing the uses of the dollars for reporting at a dashboarding level. So they don't necessarily develop the RFPs. They don't necessarily administer the contracts themselves. That's left to the local participating jurisdictions, but it is developing all of the report outs from the uses of the dollars by each of the regional or each of the local participating agencies. And it's also to basically be a hearings board if there are complaints as to the uses of the funds by the individual participating jurisdictions. So there is a body of work that will need to be done by the regional OAC. It's not as we understand it, it's not an option not to be part of the regional OAC. The one Washington MOU says, thou shalt set it up. Here are the participating jurisdictions in your region. All 10 of you have to come together, develop an MOU as to how you will establish an OAC. Okay. Make sure I haven't missed any of the critical things. I already talked about the June 1 deadline. So absent of, we've had a number of either through the civil departments reach out to other of our jurisdictions in our region. There's a couple people who have reached out, but we haven't heard from everyone. Knowing we have this timeline coming at us, we thought it would be beneficial to create a letter from the BOCC that reaches out to all other 9 jurisdictions in our region and share with them the fact that we understand we have to have a regional OAC established. We understand we have to do board composition. We're going to encourage you to have some discussions with us so that, and even suggest a point of contact from each of these jurisdictions and begin working towards a regional OAC MOU between these jurisdictions. And again, we already have a good agreement example that we can borrow and repurpose for our region. This will help us, we believe, get those conversations occurring so that we can meet our deadline of July 1st to have an OAC established. There's a number of different ways you could do a board composition, whether or not you do it based on percentages, which may add some complexity. It may add some of the jurisdictions not feeling great about it. There's also, if you look at the North Sound, they just did a 1-for-1. Every county had 1 board member, and then because they had anywhere from 1 to 5 cities in each of the counties who were also local participating jurisdictions, they then said, okay, for every for cities within a county, you get 1 board composition. So their composition of their OAC board was 9 or 10. We could be as simple as saying, let's have 1 individual from each of the local participating jurisdictions to be on the OAC. Again, it's a reminder, this is someone has to have work or educational experience in all these areas. All they are doing is their duties essentially are bringing all the data up from the local jurisdictions as to how they're spending it, programs are using it on, consolidate it into a dashboard, and essentially be a hearings board for them. You could also, one of the things that we talked about is how might the BOCC get some ideas onto uses of the funds, gap analysis, needs assessment. That might be something you say, hey, we'd like to hear from the OAC to give us some ideas.
So in your board composition, did you talk about a weighted structure then?
That was one of the things, that's a couple different alternatives. You could do a weighted structure, you could do a 1-for-1. And I think from what we looked at, because the duties are somewhat limited, they're not making decisions on the uses of funds. They're not making decisions on programs you're spending on. They're not doing contract administration. Does it really need to have a weighting? But it's something certainly for the board to consider.
Well, that's the structure today. We don't know what the structure will be tomorrow in terms of the requirements and things like that. And just, with over half the funds coming to the county, if you don't do a weighted structure, you could have folks that are on the de minimis side of that dictating how you're going to spend money. That doesn't seem to be equitable.
That's where we would articulate the responsibilities of the OAC within the MOU so that it can't change without going back and all 10 jurisdictions agreeing to change the MOU. Okay. So I'll read you off quickly what the North Sound.
That's right. I don't need to waste their time on it. I can educate myself.
Well, I was just gonna add, so 10% can be used for administrative, so the other 90, I mean, it sounds like, are there any model programs? Are there recommendations how much flexibility actually is there going to be to
determine the use of the dollars? Because I notice, I mean, the term here, or what, one of your bullet points on the previous slide at the bottom is, you know, if there has to be a hearing, you know, in regard, you know, alleged failure to use opioid funds for approved purposes. Is there a definition of what approved purposes are?
It's about a 20-page document of eligible uses. It's very well clearly laid out there, whether it's treatment, education, there's some first responder opportunities to do some investments in. So it's already laid out. You're not supposed to be spending outside of those eligible uses of it.
Okay.
And again, all those decisions.
We're pretty much limited to a list that is provided to us.
Yep. Okay. And all those decisions are within the local participating jurisdiction. So in that case, Spokane County, just the BOCC, you have the ability to solicit public input, develop your prioritized list of spending, then go out and do RFPs, get contracts executed, monitor the use of the funds, report those use of the funds, and up to the OAC. The OAC does the aggregation, does the data collection, does the outcome-based stuff, and then just ensures that if there's a hearings level to be able to make sure that it's spent in the right areas.
So is there a life to this MOU? 5 years, 10 years, 20 years?
I'm trying to think what, I'll look at this, Commissioner. I believe they did the MOU to go in parallel with how long the dollars are coming in and probably some period of time after until all the dollars are spent out. But I'll look. I don't know off the top of my head what the term was of it.
Yeah, I just don't want a Martin Hall too.
Oh, yes. You would have a.
I think it's just, yes, I think it's
Did I say that out loud?
Yeah, you can say
the basis of the funds. Except that.
Yeah, and we've got Dale Anderson and Anderson and Chris's team working really closely with us on this as well.
So just so simply, what does the OAC have authority to do versus the elected officials in terms of the funds?
Yep, no, great question.
Can you just, it still seems a little bit fuzzy.
So it's very explicit in the MOU. The primary function of the OAC is to monitor the distribution of opioid funds to the local participating jurisdictions. It's to develop and maintain a public dashboard for expenditure data on the uses of the funds. It's to, if necessary, collect additional outcome data to evaluate the use of the opioid funds. And it's to hear complaints on potential incorrect uses of that. The local government has some very specific duties as well, and those are developing methodologies for obtaining proposals, establishing the priorities, getting government or getting community input on those, reviewing and approving the proposals that come in, and then basically report up through the OAC the uses of the dollars. So all of the ability to prioritize and direct the dollars and contract and administer those stay with the local government.
So whether it's the city of Spokane or the county or Stevens County, they still make that decision on the actual allocation of the funds.
Unless they want to utilize some of the things that the BOCC establishes. So what we're envisioning is, we've talked with Justin Johnson over at Community Services, and they do so many things that are very compatible with what these uses of funds are. So we believe the right place for this to house, it's very similar to North Sound. All of the counties and cities entered into a contract with the North Sound BHASO. So we would envision something similar. We would recommend that the BHASO be where the OAC kind of subcommittee sits there. And then for us as the county, again, Justin's very knowledgeable in programs and service providers who do this type of work. So we would recommend that his team actually is the one who executes against what the board sets as priorities, and then goes out and does the RFPs, collects the information, contract administers them, working closely with our grants office as well. So it would be kind of a team effort in there. Other jurisdictions can set up however they want to contract administer it. if they say, hey, the dollars we're receiving are pretty minor, can we just jump onto what the county's doing? Can we give you our funds and you just bring them into your process? That's something that also could be considered.
So, but then the 10% that the OAC is getting, can that come down to the different jurisdictions to help administer?
Yes, so there's
Because
another.
they're not gonna be really doing a lot of administration.
Yep. There's two components, actually. The OAC gets 10%, and then local jurisdictions can also use up to 10% for their administration costs as well. So there's two different uses of those OAC funds before you get to the actual programming, or the actual, putting dollars out for bid. So that way it allows the local jurisdiction to cover costs of actually administering contracting and evaluating the performance of the providers.
But the idea behind this OAC is that they're looking at it more holistically. So we don't end up like contracting for duplicative services between like the city and the county. I guess that's what, I mean,
You
kind of
could
like with the
use-
homeless regional structure that we're discussing, the idea behind that is that you're looking at where all the funds are and how they're being spent, and if you're getting to the outcomes of reducing homelessness, what's the conversation been with the city of Spokane around, like, they don't have a Justin, they don't have a department that already does a lot of investing in behavioral and substance treatment work. So is the goal of this OAC, this committee, to be able to be looking at holistically how the funds are being spent and outcomes in the community?
It's not specifically called out that it will purposely avoid duplication. This agreement, this One Washington, was developed by class action attorneys. And as Chris has shared with me, they likely have more expertise in their methodology and calculation for which the jurisdictions are going to get. This One Washington MOU that they developed, one could argue it's a little clunky, because they probably didn't think about the fact that you have to bring all these jurisdictions together and force them to do an MOU. So by definition in there, they're really limited. The OAC is really limited in the roles. It's just to oversee, but it doesn't say, hey, I'm gonna go in and stop Spokane County or Stevens County from doing this or that because they know it's already happening somewhere else. They're receiving information of how the local jurisdictions are spending their money and consolidating it so the public can see how the funds are being spent. Could it be done that way? If all the jurisdictions agree and they wanna collaborate on 3 to 5 prioritizations and all agree on that, it absolutely could allow for something like that.
And we could decide, right, to charge the OAC with doing some kind of gaps analysis and recommendations, as you indicated. Wouldn't be binding, but it would be their expert opinion, because they are supposed to be experts. And if we do that, I might suggest we look at Commissioner French's suggestion of a weighted vote for that purpose, because I think it'd be important to get input from all the surrounding counties and smaller jurisdictions, but we'd be left with the reality that the county and the city are 80% of the funds. And we just want to make sure that that's taken into account as well. But personally, I'd love to hear from these experts, right, as to these are the folks seeing the impact on the community. What do they think is the best use?
So what you're looking for is people, let's say we had someone from every jurisdiction. So you'd want someone from Pend Oreille County that had work or educational experience in one of these areas. So it's really the expertise you're trying to get around the table. And so could be a little challenging to find someone that lives in every specific county or.
The nice thing is that I've heard is that Justin's, through the BHASO, we already interact with these surrounding counties on
We already
behavioral
work with a
health.
lot of providers and service people in treatment centers around the region. Now, would they have to recuse, what if they got funding? What if there was a treatment center in Pend Oreille and there's only one treatment center and the person that runs that center is on this group? Are you trying to avoid people that there might be a conflict?
Yeah, we talked through that quite a bit, and I think what we felt is the limited role of the OAC, you're not necessarily making decisions or reviewing RFPs. That would be done at a local jurisdictional level.
Okay.
So these are really the experts in there. And Justin, as Commissioner Jordan mentioned, felt very comfortable with that. His work with the 6-county region already, he knows a lot of folks and providers in there. He's very comfortable with that, and using them on the OAC would be a nice way to get some information from the community input standpoint to help each of the jurisdictions get some information on how they might want to prioritize. And you could write it as such that if you want to use the OAC, doesn't mean it's binding. They're going to come back with the recommendations, and the commissioners might say, we like priority 1, priority 8, and priority 10. You could do something like that as well. But it's not required to use the OAC for that. Justin thought that would be a good use of them because of their expertise in these areas.
But that makes sense. They're not making the decisions on the actual contracts. And so I just remember it was always challenging at the city with this, with the CHHS, like the boards that would review. You couldn't have anybody on the board with CDBG that would have a conflict of interest because they're putting a proposal for. So that was, anyway, okay. But this is not, they're not gonna be reviewing and making recommendations on the proposals, okay.
Not to say that they can't. I mean, at the end of the day, the county, you all could say, I know that the OAC's required work is here. We want you to do this stuff as well, but by keeping the decision-making out makes it cleaner because you don't have conflicts in there. So you could have a situation where if you have a board of 10 on the OAC, 6 of them have to conflict out, and only 4 of them can review an RFP. Right. So I think keeping the RFP, again, Justin was very comfortable with the RFP development, the contract administration, to remain at his team's level, not necessarily at the OAC level. So we haven't went into, we've gotten a lot more clarity working internally as a team, having Chris's team be involved and really help us kind of come to better understanding of what our next steps need to be, because this is the most near-term one, just the development of the regional OAC. There'll be future conversations with you all on, okay, how do we establish priorities? How do we contract administer these sort of things? We've got some recommendations on that, but first and foremost, we wanted to get this regional OAC established, help you understand kind of how it needed to be composed of. And then, because no one else is really asking, we think it would be good to have a letter to initiate those conversations with the other jurisdictions from the BOCC. Again, it's not the BOCC is not establishing it. BOCC is one of 10 entities. So if you're good with that, you don't have any questions, we'll move forward with developing. Actually, we already have Dale Anderson working on developing a letter. We've got a couple different examples of a regional OAC model for an MOU, and we could share that back with you and say, go, let's get this thing sent out.
Would the letter include any attachments, or would it just be, let's initiate a conversation? Can't remember what the thought was there.
We could include all the attachments just to make sure everyone has them. I mean, every jurisdiction should, but you all have all the documents from today, and that's essentially what it would be.
I guess I was thinking of that like a draft MOU, or do we want to start clarifying the details of that here before we start circulating that, or?
It's a good call.
Yes.
We've got 2 drafts right now. One is a weighted composition based on percentages, and one is a 1-for-1 based on the 10 jurisdictions.
But then this would be alternative C is what you're saying. 1-for-1, but then a weighted vote.
Yeah, I think that's what.
Yeah, because
Is
without
that
the
what's
weighted
in?
vote,
Do you see what?
Yeah.
Because we've
It
done
was
that,
that,
what's the other
Commissioner.
board that we've done that on in the past? There's been some other,
well,
maybe SRTC? No, we had discussions about that at some point with another board, but.
that we did, trying to,
I think it was SRTC, but
I think it is our SRTC. Yeah,
There's an opportunity to do one if someone asks for it.
right.
Right.
Yeah, microwave voting, right.
So there's some language you could pull from SRTC's
Yes.
like guiding documents.
And the essentially the second option was that you have one from each jurisdiction, but it's then weighted when they're voting.
Okay.
Yeah, incorporate that.
This is, my thought might be to include, just to do the letter, saying we're would like to discuss this with you, and maybe the letter could indicate that we've begun drafting some possible MOUs. Give us a call and go from there, rather than sending out drafts that are not complete or haven't had decision points finalized here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say we should figure out what option we want,
Right.
and that would be the draft that we send out.
That's it.
Thank you for saying what I was thinking.
So.
Yes,
So
too many
yes,
drafts
we'll
flying
need to
around.
come up with
It'd
what
be
we
easy.
think that should be, and
I think most of these jurisdictions, I mean, they're getting, I know, I think at the ribbon cutting, I was chatting with Tim Hattenberg, and it's like, they're getting so little dollars, they're really not too, it's not like a big worry around, I think, the representation and things, so.
Keep in mind that a couple of these counties are the same counties that won't let us out of Martin Hall.
Oh.
Just saying.
Let's make sure we,
They love spending our money. And
Okay.
so,
yes.
so I need to get going here.
Agreement
So
that's
there's a
gonna
couple proclamations.
be a good
that-
one.
One of them
Okay,
you've
legal, we're
asked,
looking at
do
you.
you wanna hit on that?
Get
Yeah,
us stuck.
so I just got an email from the group, so for
You'll
the
do your
childcare
best.
providers, that's beautiful. Since we provided, the funding to the pilot project and provided funding, thought that went through what they suggested. So if we're okay to move forward with that, that was the one that came to me. And then, okay, so
Who's gonna come and like receive that?
I have no idea, so,
I was just gonna reach out to that lady who emailed you,
okay.
see who,
Maybe Community Mind Enterprises is involved, I don't know, they do a lot of convening.
I'll find out
There-
who's involved.
There was a certain lady that reached out to me, and sent it to me, so I'll let Jared start there.
5 or 6. You could also, just suggestion, because Workforce Development Council's doing the, they're the
maybe
ones
they
who
can come
receive
to
the
you.
funds from the commissioners. That would be a good opportunity as well.
And then the other one is one that Commissioner French hit upon about a month ago, but we held off because the Eastern Washington Cybersecurity Team, also known as the Cyber Defenders, went to a national championship and they won.
Wow.
And that was just last week, so I'm glad we held off because now we have something even cooler to celebrate. But
this is a secret though.
Yeah, classified.
So both of these are good to go for next Tuesday for presentation. Okay, 1, 2, yep, 3 head nods, 4 head nods, 5 head nods.
Heads
All
are
right.
nodding, heads are nodding.
Awesome, so I'll let you finish. If there's any other miscellaneous or any of that?
Any other miscellaneous items? Miscellaneous items, anyone?
How did the DC trip go?
Well, it was busy.
If they had you moving,
What's that?
they had you moving and
Oh, well, I mean, we had a lot of other meetings set
you
up
had
in
STA
addition
stuff
to.
too, right? Did you do some STA visits?
I did STA, I did airport, I did SRTC, I did county. In fact, if you travel on it or in it, I met with them. And so, whether it's FTA, FAA, Federal Highways, Federal Rail, and so that was very, very good. Larry and I got a lot of good progress out of those meetings. The meetings with Cantwell and Murray. I wasn't at Murray's, I was at Cantwell. She continues to be a cheerleader for us. One of the things that she has been pushing, and Larry and I attended a symposium that she put on here several weeks ago, is centers of innovation. And so she did have some of our federal team out here several weeks ago talking about how to create centers of innovation. And it's around whatever topic you think your community can excel at. And so we have
you know, you've got bioscience, which is
That's what I
one
was,
that would be.
first thing that came to mind,
Be
yeah.
clearly a center of innovation, and so we're looking at how do you mature that thought? Because if you can, there's federal money available to help nurture that along. And then the other one is around aerospace and advanced manufacturing as a center, and we have a good foothold in both of those. So now the conversation is, how do we mature that? And so those conversations are going on, but she's very supportive of Spokane becoming a innovation center. And we could conceivably be an innovation center for 2 or 3 lines. But she said, pick one and be excellent at it, whatever that is. And so we haven't narrowed down on what that is yet, but that is a topic of conversation. Other than that, I mean, the staff people came in and say, rah, rah, we're here for you. That was nothing new. And then the other part of it.
Any of the earmarks that, was there any discussion of what we put forward for some different earmarks?
Posted on their websites.
Yeah.
As they have to know which ones they are forwarding. And so that's all.
Oh.
I did in the meeting with Cantwell specifically, and Larry and I had a separate meeting with her. She is very, so about 5 years ago, I was one of 2 county commissioners that participated on the Joint Transportation Committee study for road rail intersections. How do we make those intersections safer? And so we, Lisa Janicki from Skagit County and myself from Eastern Washington. And so we identified all 2,400 rail intersections throughout the state, and then prioritized them, ranked them. Interestingly enough, out of the top 15, 8 of them were in Spokane County. I don't know that that had anything to do with me, but certainly campaigning for that. And so you know, the Pines, Barker, you know, Sullivan, and then now we've got some up in the West Plains and stuff. So those have ranked high. And so Cantwell then took that work and created a federal pot of money to deal with road rail safety. And so they've already done 1 grant application. We did not submit anything in that. There's another one coming out here latter part of this month, for part of next month. And she specifically said, you are applying, right? Mm-hmm. And so I did send an email off to Kyle and Matt and Scott saying, you know, we need to get in the game because she's anxious to get some money to us for these projects and stuff. So I did put that on the radar. And then we also did socialize Four Lakes interchange, and federal work that has to happen to make that interchange a 4-leg instead of a 2.5 or 3-legged like it is now. But other than that, and then the airport, getting more money for tracks for the airport is the other priority. But all in all, I mean, we received really well, but you know, I've never seen them not receive us well. So, I mean, that's just part of the game. But we got good audiences and we got good staff support and we got good interaction with the agencies that we interact with the most.
Excellent.
So, yeah. That's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Good. Jared, any updates on anything else for us? Anything else going on? Media hounding you on anything?
It's not ready for prime time yet.
Okay. All right.
We do have a fairly lengthy exec session item with Chris and possibly another one, depending on what your schedules look like. If you wanted to hold it now, come back at 2, continue the meeting and come back at 2. And then we could also cover, Jeff had drafted the draft letter that you could review as well. So I just wanted to see what the wishes of the commissioners were. I think with the exec session, I think it'd be best if all 5 commissioners were available. So
And probably if we weren't trying to rush through it, this would probably be one I would not want to put a tight timeline on or have people thinking about lunch as opposed to
Should we
engaged in the issue.
check in to see when Commissioner Kinney will be back? I can do later this afternoon. I don't know.
Or if it's if it's GSI, I think they're noon to 1.
Noon to 1.
So, and 1:30 at the latest.
Yeah.
So we go to.
I'm flexible.
Continue to.
I know. Let's go all day till 5 p.m. Celebrate someone's birthday here. Yeah. Let's just do a whole day.
I got a hard stop at 5
You gotta spend your whole day with the county.
Yeah.
So 2 o'clock will only be the executive sessions then?
Unless there's a,
And we could do the miscellaneous if you want to review the letter, that.
Oh,
that,
gotcha. Yeah.
Jeff had drafted up.
Gotcha.
So we can take that first if you want to.
You can have it done by 2.
It's done.
Already is.
Oh, it's so nice guy.
Yeah.
It's-
So we cranked it
You
out.
guys can look at it and make comments.
Yeah, okay, if you got copies, sure.
Of course I have copies.
All right. I was just gonna ask you, email it to us.
My email, you can get paper.
Why?
Do it the old fashioned way.
Exactly. So if you give me comments or edits, I could incorporate those in the one shot.
Okay.
It's heavily based on the points that Commissioner Jordan sent around,
I kinda guessed.
yeah,
and then put it into paragraph style.
shouldn't be too much of a surprise. So is there a reason why you've eliminated expletives?
There are no expletives. I would say this fairly strong. Okay.
I mean,
I'm
I
just
don't have
kidding.
any responsibility.
All right, we'll review this over the lunch hour and come back with our edits if we have any.
HR related.
Anything else for the good of the order?
That you knew about.
Okay, all right, then it is 12:03 and we will be back at 2 o'clock. We're adjourned.